It all starts in a dark and rainy forest, and a group of heavily armed knights marches through the woods, searching for something, until one of them finds a vampire and asks if it was fun hiding all night, declaring that the filthy creature ended many lives while it was on the loose, and that pulling one over on the holy knights was a neat trick, but its role ends there. The hunter then throws him to the ground and says the vampire should be proud to be ended by him, since his very appearance is proof of all his sins. And with a sinister smile, the warrior asks if the vampire knows a little something, and reveals that he didn't capture him sooner on purpose, leaving our hero completely stunned. The knight explains that his late entry into the pursued group was all part of the plan, because he did it to stand out by capturing a rare vampire, and to send a warning to the faithless. Our boy then understands that this world is a jungle, where the strong always prey on the weak, a place where everything is determined by power, which is why he always tried to run from everything. But running got him nowhere, as he's now been captured by the relentless knight, and this is the result of a life spent hiding and scurrying around like some corrupted being. The knight says the vampire's very existence insults and tarnishes the church's prestige. Fallen on the ground, our hero thinks that, if he had another chance, things would be different, and he lets out one last cry of despair as he accepts his terrible fate. But suddenly, the young man wakes up gasping for air in a familiar place. Lying on an old rug, completely confused, our protagonist doesn't understand what the heck just happened, and he realizes his neck and limbs are all intact, without a single scratch. Our boy finds it strange, as he was sure he had met his end, but he recognizes that old tent. Looking at a makeshift calendar, he sees the date is from 6 months in the past. At that moment, it finally clicks, and the young man understands that, somehow, he's gone back in time. Eugene then clenches his fist tightly, thinking about the second chance he just received. The story takes us to an isolated village in the forest, a place untouched by humans, where our hero lived as a weak vampire, hiding and trying to survive. He didn't drink human blood, but one day his instincts got the better of him, and everything went wrong. After that, mercenaries and holy knights began to patrol the entire village looking for him. Scared, Eugene spent 12 long years drinking only the blood of forest animals. Eugene doesn't know how he went back in time, but now he can't make the same mistakes again, and he thinks that if he's going to meet his end anyway, the only way out is to get strong enough that no one can stop him. With that, our protagonist decides that from now on, he's changing his survival strategy. The young man remembers that vampires can absorb power by sucking blood, so the stronger the blood's owner, the greater the amount of power that can be obtained. And at that moment, a creature appears before him. It was the master of the forest, a giant beast that emerges from the swamp to attack our hero. Even with the creature charging at him, our boy shows no fear and even cracks a smile. The monster launches some projectiles, but Eugene manages to dodge them all with his agility. He knows his current body is weak and he can only dodge, but if he can get a small cut on the beast, he'll be able to suck the creature's blood and finally get the power to fight for real. The survival method he's used until now has been to erase his presence as much as possible. But since he knows that failed, there's no reason to hesitate, because he desperately needs power. With all his strength, our protagonist charges forward and shoves his sword into the monster's hide. But to his surprise, the sword's blade shatters upon hitting the creature's tough skin. The creature then seizes the opening and smacks him hard with its tail, sending him flying. He's thrown violently by the blow, and on the ground, he writhes in pain. That giant gator has some serious strength, and Eugene isn't sure he can beat it. We're then told that roamers are monsters living in regions called magic realms, and some of them possess magic stones, even in powerless environments, making them rarer than jewels. For this creature, the magic stone is its core, and if our hero can find it, he can turn the tables. But the power difference is obvious, and maybe he took this opportunity a bit too lightly, because the forest master could end his life before he even managed to injure it. With that, the monster attacks again, causing a huge explosion in the murky swamp water. With a sad look, seeing his end, Eugene thinks it would be weird to get another chance to be reborn, and the gator bites down on him as he reflects that he overestimated himself. And that's why you can never let your guard down. For that reason, he always crawled and held his breath so no one would find him. Our boy always fought hard just to survive, and now would be no different. Inside the creature, he has tremendous willpower and resolves to fight, declaring that he will fight this time and win. And suddenly his body starts to glow, covered in runes. His hair begins to grow with such determination, and Eugene knows that if he doesn't win now, he won't get another chance to change his destiny. So he shoves his hand into the monster's mouth to grab the creature's power core, ripping out the magic stone, because survival is always built on the blood of others. With an intense glow, the gem shatters into 1,000 pieces, releasing all its energy. After a while, the night once again reigns calm and silent over the swamp, but suddenly, a huge explosion of light illuminates the entire forest. Our boy remembers he swore that if he had another chance, he'd do everything differently, and he'd choose the path of fighting and confrontation instead of spending his whole life running. With that, Eugene, now transformed, faces the carnage he himself caused, and with a new look and red eyes, he says he'll conquer both blood and victory. The night remains quiet as Eugene stands under that imposing moonlight, thinking he only needed the monster's blood, but ended up absorbing the mana stone too. The ability he gained was being able to create black scales on his skin like armor. Eugene remembers finding out about the monster when he was captured by mercenaries in the past. Back then, amidst the chaos, he drank the creature's blood and managed to escape, and knowing its effects, he decided to drink the creature's blood again. No matter what, that night, Jungdurit would find him anywhere, so he must have a special detection ability. With dawn approaching, Eugene thinks it's best not to test his new power and to head back to his Hediot, when suddenly a mysterious voice says that the false master who stole its territory and turned the lake into a swamp is gone. This voice then thanks our protagonist for giving that monster such a terrible end, and sad is that invading the place and dirtying the land with blood are sins that must be paid for. Just then, an elemental creature appears and says, "This is the territory protected by the great Myriad." With a furious look, she curses Eugene, saying his body will suffer a curse and be torn to pieces. The little fairy wonders if the bald vampire hurt her, but our hero simply asks what she is, and the tiny creature is in total shock when she realizes Eugene is talking directly to her. In disbelief, the fairy is speechless, and our protagonist repeats the question, wanting an answer. She asks if he heard everything, and the young man confirms, mentioning he was called a bald vampire, which makes the fairy blush. The creature introduces herself as Miriam, a water spirit, and says she was the master of this place 15 years ago. But she corrects herself, saying she was actually a strategic partner, and thanks him again for taking out the monster. The fairy thinks she saw an old bald guy get eaten, and suddenly a handsome dude appeared, and that's when our hero notices something odd. The fairy compliments the tattoo and asks what it means, but our hero can't say, as it's always been there, explaining that he was born a vampire and that, from his earliest memories, the 10 tattoos were already on his body. Since he can't remember his past, he just focused on staying quiet and surviving, without looking back. Our boy wonders if one of the tattoos was a seal that broke, and then says goodbye to the fairy, who complains about being alone, and that purifying the lake will take a very long time. The little fairy then offers to serve him fresh water, bragging about how delicious her water is. Miriam insists, saying clean water improves the skin, but our protagonist makes a disgusted face. She creates water with her own hands and offers it again, but our boy tells her to get lost right away. Desperate, the fairy begs him to stay, but the young man says he doesn't need anything and continues on his way. A few days later, the scene shifts to Broadwin Village, a small town in the middle of the mountains, where a man runs into a house and yells for the chief that the red-eyed monster has appeared. At that, all the villagers rush out into the street and stare in shock at something at the village entrance. On the ground, there was a large pile of hunted animals, like boars, deer, rabbits, and even ducks, and the people wonder what the red-eyed monster is planning with all that food. It's then revealed that this monster is our hero, who lives in the mountains and shares his hunt with the village, hiding in the bushes. Our hero asks if he can come into the village for a bit. It's revealed that when he appeared over 10 years ago, everyone was terrified of his presence, but since he brought animals as tribute, the people stopped worrying about him. Our protagonist says he lived far away because he was sick, but now he's finally cured, saying he received a lot of help from the village, and so he'd like to repay all their kindness. The villagers are in total shock, and he tells them to call him if anything happens. Then, our boy takes off his mask, revealing an incredibly handsome face and a gentle smile, and the villagers totally lose their minds over the guy's good looks, and some even faint from the shock. Someone wonders if the creature from the forest was actually a half-elf or even a noble. The village chief then thinks that he always wore a mask, and never imagined he looked like that. The fairy Miriam appears and asks Eugene what he's thinking after giving away all the food. Our protagonist explains that among humans, showing goodwill is very important. Miriam doesn't get at why he cares about people he's not even going to devour and who he'll be leaving soon. Seriously, our hero says he can't just ignore what's about to happen, and reveals that if they don't act, mercenaries will storm the village, and everyone there will meet their end soon. Our hero explains that the mercenaries are coming to the village to take a specific boy, and that their plan is to kidnap the boy for a lord and then erase all witnesses to the crime. The fairy Miriam is shocked and wonders if what our protagonist is saying is true. Eugene says they'll find out soon enough whether it's true or not, leaving the fairy even more confused. She doesn't understand what gaining trust has to do with mercenaries, and the young man just calls her rude. While flying distracted, Miriam ends up crashing right into our hero, who had stopped suddenly, and the little creature complains in pain, asking why he just stopped like that in the middle of the path. But she cuts her complaint short when she realizes our boy is staring intently at something. Just ahead, a group of mercenaries armed to the teeth appears on the forest road, The men see our protagonist alone and wonder who that guy standing in their way is. Their leader says the guy looks weak and that the plan was to invade the village in secret, noting that our hero is unarmed and alone, but if he shouts, it could ruin everything. With that, the chief orders one of his men to make sure he doesn't make a sound. Seeing the mercenary advance with an axe in hand, Miriam screams in desperation for Eugene, and the brutal attack comes down with full force toward our boy. With his eyes glowing red, our hero braces for the mercenary's imminent attack, and in the blink of an eye, he dodges the axe and counters, while the rest of the group stands in shock. He explains to Miriam that they need their trust. Our protagonist continues, saying that this way they won't look suspicious to anyone, and with a sinister look, he reveals his true plan, which is to take out all the mercenaries right there. He stresses to the fairy to think carefully, because gaining people's trust is essential. Miriam is dumbfounded by the violent scene, as our hero says he doesn't want to look suspicious. With sharp claws and a smile on his face, he repeats that he's going to finish off every single mercenary. One of the men who survived the first attack screams in desperation that the guy's a vampire, but their leader tells them not to be afraid, and that this is a great chance to earn a reward. The man attacks with his sword, but our boy stops the blade with just one hand, leaving the enemy in a panic. With a swift and precise move, Eugene finishes off the mercenary leader without any mercy. Seeing this, the rest of the group realizes he's no ordinary guy and decides to attack all at once. Several men charge forward, yelling that the vampire's head will be theirs, but our hero isn't fazed. In the blink of an eye, our protagonist rushes the enemies, and a huge battle begins. A big mercenary calls our hero a demon, and tells his friends not to attack recklessly. With his giant mace, the man charges forward, yelling he'll crush anyone who gets in his way, but is shocked when our protagonist manages to stop the blow with one hand, without breaking a sweat. With a cold gaze, our boy says the day is getting dark, and that's not going to be good for the mercenaries. And then he finishes off the big guy with a single, swift, and accurate blow, leaving the man no chance. Amidst the bodies of his enemies, he says the night is his time and the best moment to get blood. The remaining mercenaries are scared of what they've seen and decide to attack all at once. Just then, the villagers arrive with torches and are completely shocked by the scene they find. Seeing the whole mess, one of the men wonders how all of this could have happened. The village chief then faces our hero and asks directly if he was responsible for all of it. Our boy denies everything on the spot and says he found the men while returning from a hunt in the woods, pointing to a pile of dead wolves and saying they were the real culprits behind the attack on the mercenaries. The villagers approach carefully and see the bodies of several black wolves scattered on the ground. He explains that he killed some wolves, but others might be nearby, which makes the chief very suspicious. But one of the villagers confirms there are wolf claw marks on the men's bodies, supporting the story, and another villager confirms, saying all the bodies were attacked by wild wolves. The chief still finds it strange, but apologizes for suspecting our hero without reason, and suggests burying the bodies in the village so they don't become animal food, while Miriam calls our hero a liar. In her thoughts, the fairy remembers the wolves only showed up later to clean up the mess he made, and she also recalls that our boy personally forged the bite marks on the bodies to cover his tracks. Miriam doesn't understand why he cares so much about his image if they could just leave, and the little fairy remains thoughtful about his intentions as our hero prepares to show something. He hands over a letter he found on the mercenaries and asks if the village chief wants to read it, and the man recognizes Lord Tiwan's seal on the letter. Shocked by what's written on the paper, with wide eyes, he can't believe what he's read and wonders if it's really true. The chief then yells in desperation, asking if a boy named Pellet is in the village at that moment, because the letter reveals that Pellet might be the illegitimate son of Lord Tawan, making him an important target. In a flashback, we see our protagonist questioning if that brat is really a member of the nobility. We also see the mercenary leader stunned by our hero's power, wondering where he came from, and the man is amazed by the young man's speed, who takes down several of his men in the blink of an eye. One of the mercenaries yells that if they go back now, they'll be done for anyway, and tells everyone to fight, saying that even if he's a monster, our hero only has 2 arms, so they should attack together. Their leader despairs, as he can't even escape with the vampire in the way. With no other option, the last man standing charges with his dagger for a desperate attack against our hero, and with his eyes glowing an intense red, our boy prepares to end the fight once and for all, but in a flash, he lands a powerful punch right in the mercenary's face, who doesn't stand a chance. The impact of the blow is so strong that the man flies back and slams into a tree, breaking it in half. Our protagonist walks past the last enemy, fallen on the ground without even a glance back after the final attack. Now, with all the mercenaries defeated, the last survivor begs him to stop all of this, and asks why he was attacked and if our hero was waiting for them from the start of the mission. He still tries to lie, saying he just had business in the village, but our boy isn't buying the excuse. With an intimidating look, our protagonist says he's very curious about their business in his village. The mercenary panics and says he didn't know a vampire lord ruled the village in that region, revealing he was looking for the illegitimate son of the Taiwan family, who was hiding there. Our hero calls him a liar and asks for the real reason, as he wouldn't need so many men for that, and then questions the last mercenary if the plan was to wipe out the entire village. The man denies it and confesses they were hired by the legitimate sons of the Taiwan family, swearing the mission was just to kidnap the boy and that they brought reinforcements purely as a precaution. Our protagonist's face turns serious as he remembers one of the masterminds behind that job. It was Bertel Taiwan, the manager of the vampire hunting team that tormented him in the past. With this, our boy understands that the plan to wipe out the village was pure greed from the mercenaries, and it was because of this that, in the past, the Holy Knights ended up discovering him. The mercenary keeps begging and swears he never would have done it if he'd known about a vampire there. Eugene then says he understands and tells him to watch out for wolves on the way back, not believing his own luck. The man starts thanking our hero for sparing him, but our protagonist is no fool and finishes off the last enemy without a second thought. The fairy doesn't get it, but he explains that he can't leave anyone alive after being discovered. With a cold gaze, our boy says he did everything at the right time for his plan to work. Just then, several glowing eyes appear in the darkness of the night, drawn by the scent in the area. Meanwhile, the chief confirms to the villagers that the men wanted to take Pelid to the castle, and a villager remembers that Pelid's mother passed away, and he's been living alone in the village for 8 years. Our boy offers to take the kid, since he knows the forest well and can avoid the beasts. The chief is surprised and says they couldn't possibly ask such a thing of him, but Eugene smiles and says a knight can't ignore this, leaving Marianne indignant at the lie. The little fairy is completely speechless at the nerve of our hero. The villagers are also in shock, and the chief even asks if he's really a knight. Marianne freaks out and can't believe what our protagonist is doing right in front of her. With a smirk, our hero says he hasn't properly introduced himself to everyone yet and introduces himself as Yan of House Eugene, and the fairy wonders if they'll actually believe that. One of the villagers scolds another, saying it's rude to doubt and that they should call him Sir Eugene. Our boy explains to the fairy that these people have never seen a real noble in their lives, and continues, saying that even if he pretends to be a noble, they wouldn't know the difference. The village folk now believe everything and ask if he stayed in the forest to train. Our protagonist says he had his reasons for living in isolation, and all the villagers celebrate. The chief worries about not being able to pay, but our hero says he just needs a place to spend the night, and the village chief is happy, offering his own house to our hero. By day, inside a room, our protagonist tests his new power. His eyes glow red and his hand is covered in very durable black scales, and he realizes the scales block the sunlight, which will make the journey much easier. The fairy Marianne then calls him stupid and asks why he lied like that. Our boy doesn't care, since he'll be leaving soon, and the fairy asks what his real goal is. She wants to know why he stayed quiet for so long, and is now making friends with humans. Someone calls for him from outside, and our hero shows the fairy that he's already gotten a new identity, explaining that people trust titles more than long, confusing explanations. Our protagonist knows that only this village would believe a lie as poorly crafted as this one. With that, he puts his mask back on and says that from now on, he'll make the lie a reality. The chief then hands over a letter of introduction and asks our hero to take good care of young Pelid, and the boy introduces himself as Pelid, saying it's a pleasure to meet Sir Eugene. Our protagonist then thinks he's going to use the boy to become a real noble, and so our hero leaves the village with Pelid and a few other villagers. Beginning their journey, our hero and Pelid walk along a mountain trail. As they approach a village, Pelid reads the sign, confirming the name of the place. Our hero asks if the boy knows how to read, and he says his late mother taught him. The boy says his mother learned to read from the man she loved, without knowing he was a noble. At that, the fairy Marianne seizes the chance and suggests he ask the boy to teach him to read. Our protagonist then asks the boy to teach him, leaving Pelid shocked. Pelid finds it strange that a knight can't read, but our hero makes up an excuse on the spot, saying his sword has kept him alive, and that nobility no longer matters to his family. With that, the two continue their way side by side on the dirt road, and our protagonist thinks that with the boy's trust, he can cover all his lies. The fairy Marianne is impressed and praises our hero's incredible acting skills, but warns him that if he keeps lying so much, people might start to get suspicious. But to the fairy's surprise, the boy Pelid already believed everything, his eyes shining. Pelid then apologizes, saying he didn't trust him at first because of his appearance, explaining that everyone in the village called him a monster, and so he ended up being influenced. The boy says that from now on he'll believe what he sees and that it makes sense he can't read. offering to teach our hero little by little so he won't be embarrassed. But as Peled was about to say something else, our protagonist senses danger approaching, and suddenly an arrow flies right past the boy's face, startling him. With a shout, Peled falls to the ground as our hero catches the arrow with his hand and faces the bandits. One of the thieves complains to the other about how he shot the arrow with the crossbow. With his eyes wide with fear, Peled realizes they're surrounded, and the bandit leader smiles, saying their scared faces save a lot of time. With that, the man orders them to drop their bags and empty all their pockets. But before the thief can finish his sentence, our protagonist charges with his sword in the blink of an eye, and in a swift and precise move, he finishes off the group's leader without any mercy. Peled is completely shocked to see his companion's speed and fighting skill. Seeing his brother down on the ground, one of the thieves screams in desperation, and our hero says they did as he asked, and were quick to give up their lives. With that, the man's brother rushes our hero, full of rage, but our protagonist dodges with ease and counters with a swift and precise blow. In the blink of an eye, he takes out the rest of the thieves with no difficulty, and the last survivor is completely terrified, starting to beg for his life. Our hero then raises his sword, preparing to finish off the last enemy once and for all, and without any mercy, he ends the man's life, who didn't stand a chance to react. Our protagonist walks victoriously through the battlefield to the last bandit, and wonders why humans always try to rob and take out the weaker ones. With a cold gaze, he questions if it's okay to hurt someone just because they look fragile, and turns to Peled, asking if he'll understand these things when he learns to read. The young man is in complete shock from the brutal scene he just witnessed. Our hero reminds him that he said he believed what he saw with his own eyes, and says he won't let a single drop of blood touch the boy. No way. After a while, the pair finally arrives in a big city, full of people and shops. At a local market, a vendor advertises rare herbs for 20 copper coins a pack, and a customer complains that the shop down the street sells the same product for half the price. While Miriam is enjoying the city, Peled warns our hero to be careful when shopping. The boy explains he's been there before with the village chief and knows the merchants are ruthless. And next to them, a man argues with a vendor and demands his money back right away. But our protagonist thinks that before worrying about that, he needs money. With that, he enters a leather shop and asks Peled to wait outside for a moment. Our boy then places a large piece of leather on the counter and asks the shopkeeper to appraise it, and the man recognizes the black wolf leather. Surprised by the amount he brought, the shopkeeper looks him up and down and realizes he doesn't seem like an experienced hunter. Seeing his clothes, the merchant thinks he's a wanderer and not a trader, and with a malicious smile, the man decides he's going to swindle the guy and make a huge profit. The shopkeeper says the leather is damaged and offers 18 silver coins, a very low price. Our hero doesn't like the offer at all, and his eyes start to glow an intense red. In a swift move, he approaches the man, who is completely caught off guard by his action. The merchant is terrified when he sees the guy's red eyes and realizes he's in deep trouble, starting to sweat and stammer that black wolf leather is rare and limited. With that, the man is terrified by our hero's aura and asks him to say something instead of just staring. Trying to hide his fear, the merchant laughs and says that since it's his first time there, he'll be generous and raise the price. But our protagonist just lets out a hem, with his red eyes glowing, showing he's not pleased. The shopkeeper realizes the offer is still too low and, in desperation, raises the price to 25 coins. And desperately, he keeps raising the price to 27 and then to 28 coins. Our boy keeps staring, and the vendor wonders how much more this guy wants to get out of him. Reaching his limit, the man offers 30 silver coins, and our hero finally accepts the deal. Later that night, the pair camps around a fire to rest. Our protagonist, now with a new mask, thinks the writing looks like a bunch of worms, and remembers Peled taught him the basics, and thinks he's still a long way from being able to read that kind of writing correctly. Miriam compliments his new clothes, and our boy says that for the price he paid, they're pretty good. He smiles, saying the market was generous, but the fairy asks if he's talking about the vendor he intimidated, and remembers the negotiation, thinking he should have pushed harder to buy something better. Our hero replies that he just needs something to block the sun, and Miriam tells him to enjoy life more. The fairy says vampires are the noblest, and should live in castles with silk clothes. Our boy asks how she knows so much, and the little fairy says she comes from the spirit realm. Miriam advises him to study, since he can live for 200 years, but our hero admits he can't read, and asks if she's good for anything besides making water, and just then Peled calls him suddenly. The boy approaches with a strange smile and asks who our hero was talking to, and our protagonist lies, saying he was talking to himself, apologizing for remembering something weird. Miriam thinks the scene with the rabbit earlier was too much for the boy, who fainted on the spot. Our hero tells Peled not to worry, as he still has energy and the night is long. The young man gets excited excited and says he has plenty of paper, so he'll teach our protagonist to read as much as he wants. And so, the night goes on with the two of them, studying together around the campfire in the forest. Our boy finds it very easy and wonders if it's always like this, but Pelid says he's extraordinary. The boy says it took him months and that a year is normal. Leaving our hero surprised, our protagonist asks if Pelid will be okay, because suddenly becoming a noble won't be easy, and the young man says his mother never really explained, and that it still hasn't sunk in for him. He then admits he didn't even expect to be well received by Lord Taiwan and blushes at the thought. But suddenly, a group of armed knights appears in the darkness of the night, startling the pair. Their leader approaches with a smile and says that camping around here isn't a good idea. With that, our hero and Pelid are on high alert, watching the men's movements, and the man notes that they are real mercenaries, asking where the pair is headed. Our protagonist knows that lying will only raise suspicions, so he decides to tell the truth, saying they're heading to Lord Tiwan's castle, and the man asks to share their camp. Just then, a young blonde man complains to the leader, Partek, about them wanting to camp there, and Partek apologizes for the young man, saying he's new to the group and doesn't know how to fit in. The leader introduces himself, and our boy says he's Knight Yang Yu-jun, leaving the young blonde man shocked. The young man laughs and asks how he can be a knight without armor and with that appearance. Then he approaches and tells our hero to be honest, because he doesn't look like a knight. Raben continues to provoke him and says he's never heard of House Eugene in his entire life, and with a malicious smile, the young man is sure our protagonist is just some phony. Our hero is visibly annoyed by the situation and his eyes glow an intense red, thinking he can't lie anymore, and that if the guy keeps digging, the story's going to change. With a furious look, our hero thinks he could take out all the mercenaries right then and there, but before he could do anything, the group's leader grabs the young blonde man's shoulder tightly. With a serious look, Partek just says Raban's name, who doesn't understand the situation, and in a swift and unexpected move, the leader lands a powerful punch on his companion's face. The impact of the blow is so strong that the young man flies back and hits the ground hard, unresponsive. Partek then bows and apologizes for his recruit's rudeness, leaving the young man in shock. Our protagonist tells him to forget it, and the leader thanks him very much for his mercy, thinking that to avoid more suspicion, he needs to become a real knight soon. Meanwhile, the young mercenary is still on the ground, completely stunned by the punch, and wakes up from his daze, totally confused about what just happened. The young man gets up, not understanding anything, and the leader calls him an idiot for his reckless actions. Partek yells at him, asking if the young man has a death wish to do something like that, and with that, he slaps the young man again, saying he saved his life, because almost everyone would have perished there. The leader scolds him for judging only by appearance, and not seeing what's right in front of him, revealing that our hero's cloak is high class and reinforced with special leather. Partek says the cheapest one costs 10 silver coins, and the young man is shocked, as that's 3 times his salary. The leader remembers our hero was reading a letter, and that proves he's no ordinary guy, and says the young man was about to draw his sword, and with luck, only 2 of them would have survived. With a watchful eye, Partek explains that while Raben was talking nonsense, he was observing our hero and saw our protagonist put his right hand inside his cloak and pull his left arm back. The mercenary explains that this is the stance of someone who controls their center of gravity to attack, and if he had been a second later, the young man's neck would have been history. But Raben retorts that the leader should have blocked. Partek then asks if the young man has any idea how terrifying a real knight is, telling him that a knight is given a wooden sword at birth and spends their life specializing in combat. Then, they enter dungeons and face monsters without fear of death to gain combat experience. And then they go to battlefields to earn merit, taking out their enemies without any mercy. Only the one who spills a lot of blood and catches the eye of the nobles is finally named a knight. The leader says that impersonating a knight is a crime, and it's a problem if he's real, and worse if he's fake, continuing that no one would pretend to be a knight without having a lot of confidence in their sword. Raben then asks if that means our hero is stronger than him, and Partek confirms that he probably is. The leader remembers that our hero is going to the castle, and that they'll meet again on the way. Our boy hears everything and thinks the title of knight carries a lot of weight and he needs to prepare, wondering why the Taimon family hired bad mercenaries before if they already had these guys. Suddenly, our protagonist approaches, and Raben panics, not knowing why he's coming over, and with a smile, our hero says he heard they're also heading to Lord Taiwan's castle, and since their destination is the same, he suggests they all travel together. The mercenaries are shocked by the invitation, and by our protagonist's stunning good looks. Sometime later, the group finally arrives at the village of Myrtella, a very bustling place, and our boy thinks that, luckily, the men believe him and so he'll be able to get information, but he knows the trouble is coming next. And just then the fairy Miriam appears, calling for him in the crowd. The little fairy says she spied on the mercenaries, and our hero asks if she found out anything useful. The first piece of information is that Lord Taiwan's health is so bad he could pass away any day, and she also reveals that a new dungeon has been discovered, but the family can't explore it right now. Our protagonist becomes thoughtful at the idea of a new dungeon to be explored. The fairy then gets worried and asks what will happen to Pelid if Lord Tiwan passes away soon. But our hero coldly replies that it's none of his business, and the fairy despairs for the boy's future. Miriam fears the boy will be attacked by his brothers, but our protagonist just watches Pelid in silence. The reason Lord Taiwan summoned the young man is just to see his son's face one last time before he departs. With a determined look, our boy says that from that moment on, the fate of both of them will change forever. After a long journey, the group finally reaches their final destination, and before them stands the imposing Castle of Roses, the residence of the noble Lord Tiwan. Our protagonist and Pelid walk, impressed, through the bustling streets of the grand castle, and the fairy, amazed, says our hero needs to climb the social ladder to live in a place like this. Our boy tells the little fairy to stop talking nonsense and to hide, leaving Pelid confused. Suddenly, one of the castle guards stops the group and asks what they're doing there. Partek introduces himself and says his group was sent by the Phelan Merchant Guild. A blonde noble appears and introduces himself as Kamara Tiwan, the eldest son and heir of the family. The mercenary leader confirms the delivery arrived safely, and the noble orders it to be unloaded. Kamura then notices our hero standing there and asks who he is and why he's not moving. Our protagonist steps forward and introduces himself as Knight Yan Eugene, surprising the noble. But suddenly a blonde man in armor arrives and asks what his brother Kamara is doing. Our protagonist recognizes that familiar voice. While the noble gets annoyed by the interruption, the newcomer approaches and says he's already told his brother not to meddle in his affairs, continuing that his duty as protector of the castle is to investigate all outsiders. With wide eyes, our hero thinks it would be impossible to forget that voice. It was the chief officer of the vampire pursuit team that discovered him in his Hediat, and he was the one who intensely tormented him along with the knight Jungdurid in his past. The man before him was none other than the fearsome knight Bertel Taiwan, one of his greatest enemies. Bertel Taiwan, the second son of the family, asks what his brother is doing there, and Kamara replies with sarcasm, saying people might mistake him for the real heir. With a serious look, the knight says that's not what he meant, and then Bertel turns to our protagonist, asking for his leave to speak directly with him. Our boy hands over a letter and says it was sent by the chief of Brodone village, and the knight is surprised to hear the village's name, seeming to recognize the place. Without hesitation, Bertel takes the letter from our hero's hands to check its contents, but Kamara, the older brother, takes it to read what's written. He recognizes the village chief's name, and at that, Bertel glares at our protagonist with suspicion. The noble is shocked to read that the mercenaries were attacked by wolves in the forest, and then understands that this boy is the illegitimate son the knight brought to the castle. Pelid nervously introduces himself, and Kamara calls him new brother with a fake smile. With a serious look, Bertel says their father was very anxious to finally see him, and the knight orders a guard to take the boy to wash up and get properly dressed. As a soldier leads Pelid inside, the young man looks back, completely confused. But before Bertel could leave, our protagonist stops him with a simple wait, saying he wants to discuss his reward and wishes to see Lord Taiwan personally. The knight is furious with the request and yells immediately that it's impossible, explaining that his father is ill and offering gold for our boy to leave. But our hero says he went through heck to bring their brother to this place. And angrily, Bertel tells him not to repeat that again, because it won't do any good. The knight yells at our protagonist, who doesn't understand the problem with just seeing him. Kamara intervenes and says he needs to introduce the new brother, and that a quick meeting won't hurt. But Bertel retorts that his father isn't even awake for an hour, and can't see some random wanderer. The older brother accuses him of controlling their father's schedule, and Bertel gets annoyed by the taunt. Kamara then turns to our hero and apologizes, saying things are complicated, and with a fake smile, he says goodbye, telling our protagonist to get home safely. The noble then turns to Pelid and offers to guide him on a tour of the grand castle. Our boy thinks that, as expected, he never intended to let him see the Lord, but suddenly a red-haired man appears and throws some mercenaries to the ground hard. The newcomer says he was looking for them, and that he finally found them there in the courtyard, revealing that these men were robbing the villagers instead of training, which is why he caught them. With a sadistic look, the man suggests making an example out of one of them. Bertel thinks that even though they're temporary for the dungeon, he can't just let this slide, and the knight says he'll discipline them later, suggesting they talk in a more private place. Just then, Partek recognizes the man, and our protagonist asks if he knows him. The mercenary confirms and reveals the man is Gaufredik, a promising knight who placed third in a tournament. Partek says Gaufredik has monstrous strength and incredible technique, and in the tournament, he beat over 1,000 competitors. Our boy wonders what a guy like that is doing here, and the mercenary thinks it's because of the new dungeon. The man explains that the first knight to conquer a dungeon gains a lot of fame, as raids are dangerous, and continues, saying that Gaufredik wants to use the place to get a title from a bigger family. With that, our protagonist calls calls Partik and asks if his contract ends today, and the man confirms. Then, with a smirk, our hero asks if he can hire the mercenary for a new job. Night falls over the castle, and the towers rise under the light of a large full moon. Elsewhere, Bertel watches the mercenaries and thinks he needs to clear that dungeon no matter what, remembering that since their father fell ill, his brother has been eyeing the position of successor. With that, he understands that his brother brought Galfredic to clear the dungeon and win the people's support. Worried in his office, Kamara thinks about what to do, and suddenly someone knocks on the door. A servant enters and informs him that Sir Eugene is asking to see him, leaving the noble thoughtful. He remembers the knight who brought Pellet and, without a second thought, tells the servant to let him in. Our protagonist then enters the office, and Kamara welcomes him, telling him to make himself at home. The noble tells him not to worry about Pellet, and that his father will reward him when he wakes up, and thanks him for delivering the letter in front of his brother, as it helped him maintain his composure. The noble seems very pleased, and our protagonist says he's glad to hear it. Our hero then reveals he only had business with the Lord, but was confused by Bertal's interference. With that, the noble's expression changes instantly, and he seems very interested in what our boy is saying, and asks if our hero wanted to see his father to confirm his identity. But Eugene has another proposal. With a serious look, our protagonist asks to be included in the dungeon subjugation squad, and then lets out a small laugh, as if mocking the noble's reaction. At that, Kamara can't hold it in, and starts laughing out loud at the proposal he just heard, saying our protagonist is funnier than he thought and repeating the word knight with sarcasm. The noble continues with his mocking tone, and doesn't seem to take our boy's title seriously, and mentions the thieves, asking if our hero wants to join the team, just to gain a reputation. Our boy replies that for the noble's current situation, this is a proposal with no downside, explaining that if they succeed, he'll take 100 silver coins and half the loot. The noble is confused, as the offer is good and well below market value, so he asks if he accepts. With a confident smile, our hero says the only one in a hurry there isn't him, but Kamara himself. Kamara asks what he wants, and our hero repeats his proposal of 100 silver coins and half the loot. The noble finds the offer suspiciously cheap, but our boy presses him for an answer. Kamara thinks that knights live for honor and that, being a wanderer, he seeks glory, not money, and since the young man doesn't want cash, the noble is sure glory is everything to him. Besides, based on what he heard before, the noble continues to analyze the whole situation. With a smile, our protagonist reinforces that he's not the one in a hurry, but the noble himself, and Kamara is completely shocked to realize he's been caught in our hero's trap. With a malicious smile, the noble understands that our boy knows exactly where to press to get what he wants, and thinks our hero isn't like the other knights, who only think with their muscles. With that, the noble finally accepts the proposal, as there's no reason to refuse such a good deal. He then extends his hand, and says he's looking forward to working with Sir Eugene. Our boy thinks magic stones are hard to purify, but monster parts are more profitable. Just then, Partek appears and offers to introduce him to a reliable merchant guild, continuing that with this condition, Lord Kamara would have no reason to refuse. In another room, Bertel complains that adding a member now is last minute, and the dungeon is no joke, and warns that one slip up in the dungeon means the end, because inside it's fight or perish. Galfredic says he won't accept an amateur, and that his expectations are low because of Kamara, and the red-haired knight reinforces that his brother has no connections with the local nobles. With that, Bertel tells Galfredic to complain to Kamara, and the man gets annoyed with the situation. Kamara then arrives, apologizing for the delay, and says he was talking with his new knight, and introduces our hero and his group of mercenaries as new members of the attack squad. Bertel recognizes our protagonist and wonders how a guy with that appearance can be a leader. With a fake smile, he tells his brother he can't accept a wanderer with questionable skills, but to everyone's surprise, Kamara says he can at least vouch for the young man's skills. The noble says he heard from his new brother about the bandits that were a problem on the border, revealing that Sir Eugene took them all out alone and that, therefore, his skills are good. Suddenly, Galfredic throws a dagger with all his might toward our protagonist to test him, and our boy deflects the attack with his sword in a swift move, and the collision creates sparks. The weapon flies and hits the door with such force that it cracks the wood in half. Galfredic then cracks a sinister smile, looking very satisfied with what he saw, and apologizes for his previous rudeness to our protagonist. He says the young man's pale skin made him look like a spoiled young master with no experience. With a smile, the knight asks if our hero wants to show what he can really do, so a duel is arranged in the castle courtyard to test Eugene's skills, and the news spreads quickly, and a crowd forms to watch the fight. Everyone comments that Galfredic is ranked 3rd and is a real monster, and a spectator says he doesn't know the opponent, but he already feels feels sorry for the poor guy. Our protagonist just calmly faces the challenge while the crowd pities him. On the other side, Gafferdick smiles excitedly and prepares for the fight with his sword in hand. The red-haired knight seems very confident in his victory against the newcomer, and with a focused gaze, the man prepares to show his power to the crowd. Eugene, on the other hand, remains calm and serious, waiting for the battle to begin, unfazed, and he stares at his opponent with his red eyes glowing from under his dark mask. The judge then raises his hand and shouts for them to prepare for the start of the combat. In the blink of an eye, the fight is over, and Gafferdick is on the ground, defeated and shocked. With a loud bell ringing, the judge finally gives the signal for the great battle to begin. Without wasting a single second, our protagonist charges full force at his opponent, and the swords clash in an instant, creating a shower of sparks all over the courtyard. The sound of metal echoes through the arena as the two test their strength in the first attack, and the force of the impact is so great that both are thrown backward. With a confident smile, Gafferdick calls our hero to the fight, looking very excited. A swift exchange of blows begins, and the two fighters move with incredible agility. Rabin gets excited and says Eugene is pressuring Gafferdick, but Pardek says he's just testing him. With a serious look, the mercenary leader explains that Gafferdick is letting himself be pushed, and the red-haired knight dodges the attacks with ease, showing his experience. Our hero realizes his swordsmanship is rougher than expected, and he can't read his style, noting that it's not a refined technique and that the opponent's fighting style is raw and wild. With that, our protagonist understands something important about his adversary and cracks a small smile. Gafferdick smiles and asks if our boy lied about being a real knight, and the knight continues, saying he doesn't seem to have been trained, but rather raised in the wild. Our protagonist advances with a powerful blow, showing all his agility, but Gafferdick defends with a smile and asks if our hero lied about being a knight, saying the young man's swordsmanship is clumsy and that he relies solely on his physical strength. Eugene then replies that swordsmanship isn't everything for a knight, and it shows in their exchange of blows. Annoyed with the conversation, our boy tells his opponent to shut up and goes on the attack, and the red-haired knight smiles, saying that if Eugene defeats him, he'll shut his trap right away. With that, the swords clash again in a duel of pure strength and speed, and the sound of steel echoes through the courtyard as sparks fly everywhere. Gafferdick pushes him, but our hero supports himself on the ground with his hand, surprising his rival. The ground cracks with the force he used to steady himself and prepare for the next move, and the red-haired knight is speechless at his opponent's quick recovery. Then our protagonist blocks another violent attack with his sword, without retreating a single step, and the clash between the two combatants generates a wave of energy that spreads throughout the arena. The force of the blow is so absurd that the entire courtyard floor begins to shatter. In the crowd, the blonde mercenary's jaw drops and he asks if the opponent was knocked out, while the red-haired knight is embedded in the wall, not believing what just happened. Our protagonist is also surprised by the result and wonders who this guy is, and with that, our hero releases a dark energy and charges at his opponent. The red-haired knight defends the blow with difficulty and is shocked by the force, and Gafferdick thinks, impressed, that his adversary learns things very quickly. With a smile on his face, he dodges a leg sweep, and the fight continues intensely in the courtyard. Our protagonist doesn't stop and continues his sequence of attacks with great agility, and the red-haired man defends another blow with an insane smile, showing he's having fun. The swords clash again, creating an explosion of sparks in the middle of the arena. In an instant, the two move in circles, analyzing each other before the next attack, and they stare at each other with confident smiles and a look of pure rivalry. The fight becomes more physical and the two start trading hand-to-hand blows without using their swords. The red-haired knight laughs and wonders how someone smaller than him can have so much raw strength, and then our hero admits that Gafferdick's strength is overwhelmingly superior to his, but the red-haired knight reveals he wasn't even fighting with all his power yet, saying he has the advantage in experience and lands a punch on our hero. Our protagonist is surprised by his opponent's fighting stance, and with the blow, Eugene is thrown to the ground in front of the whole crowd. Gafferdick smiles maliciously and advances to continue the attack on the fallen young man. Lying on the ground, our hero faces the red-haired knight who's coming at him with full force, and the man tries a powerful stomp to end the fight once and for all, but our protagonist rolls to the side and dodges the attack, which cracks the entire floor. In a swift move, he gets up and grabs the knight's arm to counter attack, and with a determined look, our boy doesn't let go of his opponent, preparing his next blow. Gafferdick thinks his movements aren't precise, but he has a survival instinct, and the knight wonders where where the heck this weird guy came from. To everyone's surprise, the man simply admits his defeat in the middle of the duel. But our protagonist doesn't stop and lands a powerful blow on his opponent anyway. The red-haired knight is thrown far by the force of the impact and slams into a castle wall, which shatters from the violence of the blow. Gafretic is left on the ground, completely defeated after the final attack. The fight's judge is in shock and announces that the great winner of that night was none other than Knight Yan Eugene, who remains standing in the middle of the courtyard, completely untouched. The crowd goes wild and wonders who this incredibly strong and unknown knight is. The blonde mercenary celebrates and shouts to everyone that this man is the knight of their group. Meanwhile, on the ground, the red-haired knight is still trying to recover from the final blow, and with a look of pure determination, he doesn't seem to accept defeat so easily. To everyone's surprise, the man gets up and faces our protagonist in the middle of the arena. With an aura of anger, his eye glows red, and he seems to want another fight. Our protagonist just stares back at him with a calm expression, showing no fear. The knight then approaches and asks our hero to fight him one more time, but raises our boy's arm and asks for a round of applause for the knight's winner. The entire crowd starts chanting our protagonist's name in one voice, and the blonde noble is furious, unable to believe what just happened. Then the scene shifts to a luxurious banquet with several smiling and well-dressed servants. Our protagonist is at a lavish banquet, all prepared just for him. A butler explains that Kamara ordered them to take good care of him for the dungeon mission. The servants even closed the curtains for his sensitive skin and offered him a glass of wine. The fairy wonders if he'll get a stomach ache, and our hero accepts, but dismisses the servants. The butler is embarrassed by the request, but our protagonist insists and tells him to pass on a message. With a serious look, he says to let them know he prefers to be alone because of his past. The next day, Kamara appears all excited and asks our hero if he slept well. Our boy says yes, and the noble notes that he rejected all the help sent. Suddenly, the blonde mercenary appears and bows happily, saying he liked the news. Gafretic also appears, calling him a friend, but our hero tells him to stop clinging. The red-haired knight then asks if he slept well and complains that his face hurt all night, showing his bruised face, and our protagonist wonders if the guy wants another beating. The man invites him to train, and one of the mercenaries even asks if he can watch up close. Eugene thinks the result was good, but he's still not used to so many people all over him. Our hero says he wants to get beaten again, but Gafretic replies that they'll only know by fighting. Suddenly, a young man with brown hair appears with a smile on his face and looks at the group and calls our hero by his name, leaving all the mercenaries confused. Then the young man asks if our protagonist has been doing well all this time. The scene shifts, and we see someone begging for their life in a dark and gloomy room. Just then, a scream of pure terror echoes through the place as a shadow is cast on the wall, and a man is on the ground, all beaten up, while another says none of this would have happened. Bertel says that if the bastard son had been eliminated, the red-eyed knight wouldn't be there, and with a furious look, he shouts that if that had happened, his plan wouldn't have gone wrong. The man apologizes, but Bertel scoffs, saying the mercenaries were defeated by wolves, and shouts that the man didn't notice, asking if his eyes are just for decoration. With a cold look, the blonde noble says that if the man isn't good for this, he's useless, and says getting rid of him won't be a problem, threatening him with a sharp dagger. The man lets out a scream of pain while the other servants watch the scene, terrified. With the floor all stained, the noble wonders what he should do from now on, and thinks he can't just eliminate someone who has already managed to get into the castle. Suddenly, Bertel has a brilliant idea to get rid of our hero once and for all, thinking it's the only way, and that with this method, the mess will be easy to clean up. Then the scene shows us young Pellet on the ground, but with a very determined look. Our protagonist asks if Bertel sent him to the dungeon that's about to open, and Pellet says he came to the castle to perish, and now he's being sent to the dungeon. He remembers that the mercenaries who attacked him were sent by one of his brothers, and our hero reveals they never wanted the boy to reach the castle alive. But he says there's a way for young Pellet to survive all of this, and with that, our protagonist offers him the chance to become his servant in order to live. Our hero explains that the boy is 16 years old, and can choose his own path. He can either stay hidden waiting for the end or fight with all his might until the very last second. On the day the dungeon opens, no one has any idea what kind of monsters will appear. The goal is to clear a path, and if a strong monster appears, the plan is to retreat immediately. One of the porters is relieved he doesn't have to fight and see all that mess up close, and plans to pretend he's injured, since no one cares about the guys in the back. One of the porters says that if it gets dangerous, they can run, but suddenly Bertel appears asking for Pellet. The porter is terrified, and the blonde noble repeats angrily that he assigned the illegitimate son to that post. Scared, the man points and asks if he's talking about that boy who's talking to our hero. Pellet hands Eugene a snack, wishing him a safe return, and the young man just accepts it. The blonde noble is furious and calls the young man an uncivilized brat who snuck into the group like a rat. Then he approaches, yelling Pellet's name, and says the boy was just slacking off. With an annoyed look, Bertel asks if he's already forgotten what was said and tells him to grab his bag and get to his post. The young man is frightened by the order and starts to move to obey, and Bertel yells at the boy, asking if his ears are already failing him. At that moment, our protagonist faces the blonde noble with a serious and defiant look. The noble then grabs Pellet forcefully and yells at him to get back to his position, but our hero firmly grabs his hand and, with a cold voice, tells him to take his hand off the boy. The noble is shocked and angry, realizing he just heard something ridiculous from a mere knight, and our protagonist asks if he's crazy for sending a brat who's never fought into the dungeon. Bertel calls him rude and says he just wants to strengthen his brother, but our hero prepares for an attack, and Bertel tells our hero to know his place, saying he has no right to boss the boy around. But our protagonist takes a step forward and says it's the noble who doesn't know his place, revealing that the young man became his servant the day before, leaving the noble shocked. Pellet himself is completely surprised by the revelation and doesn't understand a thing. Our hero says everyone there is a witness to what just happened and warns that if anyone lays a finger on the young man, he'll consider it a personal challenge. Eugene gets in Bertel's face and invites him to a brawl if he wants to warm up. The blonde noble is furious at the audacity and asks who gave permission for that. Galfredic says that taking another family's son will hinder the boy's future. One of the knights comments that the duel between our hero and Galfredic was incredible, and another man laughs, saying it would take a second lifetime to reach that level. Kamara appears and says he would also entrust his younger brother to Sir Eugene, and the noble adds that the young man is already an adult and can choose his own path. Our hero thinks Pellet is the prey, and that surviving isn't easy for the weak, concluding that if he can't get strong, the only way is to join a pack. Kamara then invites Pellet to see his quarters, while our hero thinks about the survival method of the weakest. A scout approaches and reports that there are no monsters nearby, and that nothing has escaped through the tunnels. With the report in hand, the man authorizes the opening, and our protagonist prepares to enter. With a loud noise, the huge stone door of the dungeon finally begins to open, and the red-haired knight looks seriously at the soldiers, warning each one to survive on their own. The men, including young Pellet, prepare for battle with tense expressions. Then our protagonist and Galfredic lead the charge into the dark dungeon. Outside, Kamora says goodbye to Pellet while the boy wishes our hero good luck. Inside the dark and cold cave, the group cautiously advances through a narrow tunnel. Suddenly, a horde of goblins appears out of nowhere and attacks one of the soldiers, who screams in desperation. The man continues to scream for his life, but Galfredic arrives and takes out the monsters in the blink of an eye. The soldier can hardly believe he survived, but the red-haired knight chews him out, calling them all idiots, and with a face full of anger, he yells at the soldiers, asking if they can't even hold formation. The knight then shoves the man back into place and tells everyone to get it together, and then orders the archers in the center to defend the ceiling from the goblins. The red-haired knight shouts not to let the monsters break their formation. One of the soldiers despairs and thinks it was crazy to volunteer for this mission, and terrified, the man decides he needs to get the heck out of there as fast as possible. But as he turns to flee, he comes face to face with a group of goblins, smiling in the darkness, and with nowhere to run, the soldier lets out a scream of terror as he's attacked. Our hero then appears and calls him a fool, asking if he thought there wouldn't be monsters on the way. The red-haired knight grabs him tightly and yells that the safest option is for them to all stick together, and orders everyone to raise their swords and hold their positions at all costs. In the midst of the battle, the soldier screams desperately as the goblins keep charging. The red-haired man thinks the soldier's condition is pathetic and wonders how they'll conquer the dungeon. One of the men warns that the monsters are coming in a horde again from the front, and suddenly another soldier yells that more creatures are coming from the rear. Our protagonist then steps forward and says he'll take care of the monsters in the back. The red-haired knight tries to stop him, saying it's too dangerous to go to the rear alone. But our hero doesn't listen and advances with determination to face the monsters. In the darkness of the dungeon, sounds of battle echo, keeping the red-haired knight on alert. Suddenly, everything falls silent and the man turns around, completely shocked. Our hero then uses a dark ability that creates a vortex on the cave floor, and with that, one of the goblins drops lifeless to the ground after the surprise attack. The red-haired knight then yells for Partek to follow our protagonist and cover his back, and the man is stunned by the speed at which our hero advanced alone through the cave. He can't believe the young man's agility and efficiency in the middle of combat. Eugene then returns and says he finished them all and found a strange plant on the way. The red-haired knight laughs and thinks how he doesn't even know a common luminous herb orb. He has incredible skill, but the plan in his hand had already withered. After the battle, several soldiers are injured and receiving medical care. Pellet approaches and reports that the collection of mana stones was completed successfully, and our protagonist complains that there are too few stones for the number of monsters they defeated. He then notices that, unlike the stone he absorbed before, these are all blue and small. The fairy Miriam appears and explains that the quality of the stone is proportional to the monster's power. Pellet asks about the stones from wild monsters, and the fairy explains that the gator was special, continuing that monsters like that are rare and bragging about how he stole her territory. Our hero thinks he got lucky, while the fairy says that coming in here to impress nobles is pointless. But the little fairy says there might be high-rank monsters, and at that moment, our boy feels something strange. The red-haired knight complains that the break is over and tells everyone to get ready, calling the soldiers weak and warning that he and Eugene will lead the attack. Our protagonist thinks it's a pain to lead on his first time, and the redhead tells him to try harder. And then the red-haired knight senses that the next enemies are much stronger. They warn that up ahead, powerful monsters use goblins as their soldiers, which means they'll be facing at least mid-rank creatures. The soldiers get nervous, because after this is the center of the dungeon and the danger increases, and our hero is sure a high-rank monster is waiting for them in the depths. In a flashback, our boy remembers eating the red stone from the swamp master, and with that, he recalls gaining a very significant ability after that day. Curious, he wonders if he'll gain a new power if he consumes another stone like that. Our protagonist detects more than 50 footsteps 100 meters away and 3 heavier ones behind. The red-haired knight is impressed with the young man's detection ability and lets out an "oh-ho," and then Galfredic hands him his spear, asking if our hero wants to throw it. With a swift move, our protagonist prepares to launch the weapon with all his might, and the spear flies like a red bolt of light, cutting through the air toward the monsters. The attack hits the cave floor dead-on, causing an explosion and eliminating several enemies. With the opening created, the red-haired knight orders all his troops to advance, and yells for the soldiers to follow and support the leaders at the front. Meanwhile, our hero is already in the middle of the mess, mercilessly cutting down a giant monster. A soldier wonders if Eugene is luring them into a trap with his speed, and in the blink of an eye, our protagonist lands a precise blow right in another creature's eye. The monster's head is pierced as our hero continues his relentless attack, and with an agile move, he finishes off the giant creature, cutting off its head. He doesn't stop and already turns to defend against the attack of another emerging monster, and, without hesitation, he finishes off another enemy with a violent thrust to the chest. With his face covered in blood, our hero looks like a wild beast in the middle of the battle, and on that day, the soldiers burned into their minds the image of the knight they so admired. Then he advances and grabs one of the giant monsters with his hand covered in a black aura, and with absurd strength, he holds the creature without any difficulty. His swordsmanship was elegant and just, with a nobility that never wavered, but his fighting style was unlike anything the knights knew. In fact, it was far from their admiration. It was something more brutal and terrifying. After the slaughter, our protagonist stands covered in blood amidst the fallen enemies. After the battle, the group finally stops to rest in a makeshift camp. Several soldiers are injured and the ground is covered with monster bodies everywhere. The red-haired knight notices that most of the troops have lost the strength to continue, and understands it's not physical fatigue, but mental, after everything they've witnessed. With that, the red-haired man thinks it's impossible to keep advancing with the group, and then approaches, saying they've already met their goals and asking if they can head back, but our protagonist says his energy is intact and it would be a shame to turn back now. And Eugene says if they want to go back, they can, and the red-haired knight yells that he has no choice but to continue. Our protagonist then steps on a fallen monster and makes an important decision, telling Galfredic to take the main group out of the dungeon, leaving the man in shock. At that, Eugene announces he will continue the exploration with only his trusted mercenaries. The red-haired knight realizes he noticed the soldiers' fatigue and showed consideration, and, with that, Galfredic thinks that this guy makes him rethink the true meaning of being a knight. So, our hero and his small group advance through a dark corridor full of spiderwebs, and the blonde mercenary shivers with fear, complaining that he didn't want to be there. He tries to calm himself by thinking that if something goes wrong, our hero will handle it. But suddenly, the young man trips and falls hard on the stone floor of the cave, and he looks to the side, seeing something terrifying that leaves him completely paralyzed. On the ground, there was a giant squashed spider, and the young man wonders if there are more of them around. Suddenly, the group is surrounded by a swarm of giant spiders with red eyes. They were giant cave spiders, a monster that melts its prey with an acidic venom, and the blonde mercenary lets out a scream of terror as the creatures jump on him. Pardik yells that there are too many enemies and they need to fall back, but our hero questions questions the idea, and, without a second thought, he charges with his sword against the swarm of spiders. With his eyes glowing red, he says that this number of monsters is no problem at all. The blonde mercenary shouts for them to join Eugene, while Partek is already in the thick of the fight. The battle intensifies, and our protagonist advances, cutting through the creatures with ease. Suddenly, the blonde young man is surrounded by spiders and starts screaming desperately for help, and one of the giant creatures prepares to attack the young man, who is paralyzed with fear. But our hero appears in the blink of an eye and cuts the spider in half, saving the mercenary. The young man is in complete shock, not understanding what just happened. With a serious look and red eyes, our protagonist faces the still, paralyzed young man, and then simply shoves him aside to get him out of the way of the other spiders. Our hero then returns to the battle and starts finishing off the rest of the creatures. The young man wonders if he's a monster and suggests they turn back, as they've done enough, and tries to get Partek's attention, who seems to ignore him, focused on the fight. The mercenary leader just stands there, silently observing the scene, stunned by the power he witnessed, and Partek thinks, shocked, that he's found his superior rank monster and wasn't prepared. He recognizes the absurd size and realizes it's a higher rank giant cave spider, a lord, a powerful creature that commands the other monsters in the dungeon. The giant spider opens its terrifying mouth, showing sharp fangs and a forked tongue. The blonde mercenary panics and yells for them to fall back, as they have no chance against a lord. Then our protagonist calls to Partek and the blonde mercenary with a serious look and orders them both to retreat immediately, saying with a determined look that this prey is his. Partek understands the order and feels a strange sensation, as if control of his body has been stolen, feeling all his nerves screaming to flee that place as fast as possible. The fairy Murian scoffs, saying their instincts succumb to the class difference with her master, and confirms that the Spider Lord is even stronger than the Swap Master. Our protagonist understands that the monster's mana stone will also be much larger and more powerful. The giant creature then opens its mouth in a terrifying scream, preparing to attack. With a confident smile, our hero says the tougher the chest, the more exciting the treasure. Suddenly, a small spider descends on a thread of web toward a cup in a room, and jumps to defend itself, but our hero cuts it in half with a swift attack. With a gesture, he shows off his new ability, which creates a thread of energy from his fingers. The second ability he gained was the power to camouflage his skin and appearance, and, with camouflage, he can create perfect human skin, and protect himself from the sunlight. He protects his skin with the first ability, and covers it with the second to be able to walk in the day, and now he no longer has to worry about avoiding sunlight. He can even take off his mask. In a courtyard, the red-haired knight and the blonde mercenary train while the others drink. At a banquet, a woman asks why he hid such a handsome face for so long, and another woman compliments his beauty, and a third says she heard he defeated a giant spider. The fairy Murian enjoys the attention and asks him to tell his heroic story. One of the young women compliments his appearance and asks if he has any elven ancestors in his family. Our hero thinks the situation has gotten even more complicated with all this attention, but suddenly he has an idea, and realizes that all of this finally makes sense. Gafretic thinks it's no wonder he had such sharp eyes in the darkness, and remembers his agile movements and the superhuman strength he used to throw the spear. Our hero thinks, with a serious look, that he already knew the red-haired knight was no ordinary human. Gafretic gets excited and shouts that he never imagined our protagonist had elf blood, but wonders how the young man managed to hide his appearance for so long. With a smirk, our hero starts to invent an excuse to deceive the knight, and says, with a seductive expression, that he never tried to hide his appearance on purpose. The women at the table and even the blonde mercenary are completely charmed by the answer. The red-haired knight comments that he says that without even changing his expression, leaving the young woman sighing. Our protagonist thinks that now he can use the elf ancestor excuse whenever they get suspicious, and remembers that what he gained from the magic stone wasn't just a new ability, because when the tattoo disappeared, memories he had never seen before surfaced in his mind. He saw himself lying in an unknown place, while gentle hands held his with affection, and in a strange place full of ringing bells. Everyone was looking at him intently. He wonders who the woman in his memories was, but then questions if they were even memories. The young man, who doesn't remember his past, can only recall one single thing. Suddenly, a voice calls him Sir Eugene, and he snaps out of his thoughts. Startled, the blonde mercenary appears out of nowhere and begs our hero to save him from Gafretic. The red-haired knight holds him tightly and complains that he was dead weight for our protagonist, and the young man shouts that it's because our hero isn't human and that any normal person would have run. Gafretic gets angry and says he he's gonna put him through special training for a good long while. Our protagonist thinks that the only thing he remembers is his name, but now he has a premonition. Closing his eyes and focusing on his thoughts while the party continues in the background, he believes that if he erases the tattoos, he'll be able to find out who he really was in the past, and not something fake like a knight or someone with elf blood running through their veins. In a room, Lord Taiwan receives the news that the dungeon was successfully subjugated. A young man introduces himself as Krima, Gafredic's third son, leaving our hero surprised. Then our protagonist bows, and the Lord says he must have had a very difficult job. With a gesture, the man asks for something important to be delivered to our hero. It was a document to verify his status, which will guarantee his position as a member of House Eugene. The fairy Miriam celebrates, and our hero thanks him for the gift he just received. Suddenly, Lord Taiwan starts coughing heavily, and Bertel screams in desperation for his father. The Lord says he cannot rest in peace with his second brother's ambitions. Kamara then assures him that he will lead the territory his father built his entire life well, but the old noble says the territory is just dust, and that he must remember something, and continues, saying a lord must always look after and lead the people, not the lands. At that, Lord Taiwan's hand goes limp, and he finally departs from this world. Our protagonist thinks he doesn't know what the Lord was like, but many people mourn his passing, and continues to watch the mourning scene from a distance, next to the red-haired knight, but not everyone there shares the same feelings, like Bertel, who seems quite annoyed. Galfredic says goodbye, as he has to leave, and Kamara says he understands his commitments. Then, the red-haired knight asks if our hero is really going to stay there at the castle, and Eugene reveals he wants to go to the dungeon one more time, as it would be a waste not to. The man laments and says that a certain Count Evergrow would have liked him very much, and then extends his hand to our protagonist, who is a bit confused by the gesture. Galfredic smiles and says it was an honor to compete with a knight as strong as him. Our hero shakes his hand, and the redhead says he hopes not to meet him as an enemy next time. The two shake hands in a gesture of respect and rivalry, sealing a silent pact. The blonde mercenary wishes Gafredic a good journey, and our hero tells Partek to get ready to leave. Pellet is confused and asks what the knight he was riding. One of the female mercenaries explains with a funny gesture that knights usually ride horses. Partek reveals they are going to the trading company to sell the monster items, and Pellet gets excited, saying he will help diligently, but our hero questions the word help. With a serious look, our protagonist says he won't need his help for a long time, and the young man is shocked, asking what he means by those words. In a bustling port, Pellet is confused while workers shout orders around him, and wonders why he's carrying boxes in an unknown place instead of helping. The scene takes us to Marin, the largest commercial city in the kingdom of Kaler, with a large port. Seagulls fly over the blue sea as ships and people fill the port with life. A merchant is shocked and asks if all that loot was brought by a single knight. The blonde mercenary brags, and a man recognizes the name of the dungeon in Taiwan's territory, and the blonde mercenary tells one of the merchants not to touch the items without proper care. Pellet looks at the sky and thinks about what's happening as the sun shines brightly, thinking that our protagonist's negotiations are taking quite a while. Inside the building, our hero is sitting in a meeting room, waiting for the result. A man named Billmore from the Phelan Company assures him he will take care of everything, and our protagonist thinks he didn't expect Partek to introduce him to such a large company, continuing to think that this will be very useful for someone with no connections. Suddenly, the room door opens with a loud noise and someone enters, and a man with glasses and a stylish suit appears, asking who this Sir Eugene is. Our protagonist just stares at him with a serious look. While Partek is on alert, the mercenary leader warns that the situation could get very difficult from now on, and explains that the man is the secretary to the company's vice manager and has a lot of power. Partek is sure they came to try to buy the loot for a lower price, and our hero thinks that if he wants a stable partner, he needs to act very cautiously. Billmore tries to argue, but the secretary tells him to step aside and not challenge someone he can't beat. Then the man with glasses turns and says the rumors about him have spread from the port. The secretary says they are just rumors to inflate the product's value, a rookie strategy, and invites our hero to go with him and sign a special contract with the vice manager. But suddenly, the man with glasses feels a strange pressure and starts to sweat. Our protagonist stares at him with his red eyes glowing, and the secretary wonders what this pressure is. Trying to hide his fear, he introduces himself as Grail and says it's a great opportunity, and our hero asks what kind of opportunity he's talking about. With a serious expression, the man explains it's the chance to sell the loot on much better terms. Our protagonist keeps pressing and asks what he means by better terms. Grail stammers and says the vice manager himself would handle everything personally, and terrified, the man apologizes, saying he never meant to disrespect him. He then says goodbye and runs out of the room, completely terrified by the situation. Billmore is moved and thanks our hero for refusing the contract for his sake. promising full support and saying that if our protagonist needs anything, he just has to ask. The merchant gets excited and asks when the negotiation process can begin, and our hero stands up and with a serious look tells him to step out so they can start now. Greal tells the vice manager that his offer was rejected and that the rumors were true, and the woman says it's common for knights to cause trouble because of their honor. With a malicious smile, she says they should cause trouble their own way with their power, and continues, saying the opponent is a poor knight who doesn't even have a mount. Then the orange-haired woman orders them to give him a gift he can't refuse. Peled is shocked and asks if our hero wants him to stay and sell the loot. Our protagonist confirms and tells him to sell all the items he brings to the merchant. The young man doesn't understand and asks why he has to stay behind again, and wonders if his skills are still insufficient, offering to train more. Our hero then asks what the true role of a squire is, leaving the young man thoughtful, and Peled replies that it's to help his knight in battle and in daily life. With that, our protagonist explains that his duty as a squire is to assist in his daily life, and continues, saying his mission is to sell the loot from battles to earn money. Our hero tells him to discuss the details with Belmore, who will teach him a lot about business. The young man then thinks that if it weren't for our protagonist, he would already be gone, and with a determined look, he thinks that complaining would be a disgrace to himself. Our protagonist promises that one day he will teach him to fight when they have enough money, and the young man is shocked by the promise, but his eyes shine with hope. With a smile and his hand on his chest, he seems determined to fulfill his mission, and Peled declares that he will obey his knight's orders with all his strength. Our hero and his group say goodbye to Belmore and Peled, setting off on their next journey. Walking through the city, our protagonist wonders if money always runs out so quickly. The fairy Miriam laments, and Partak says they get the money back quickly. Our hero then stops, and a magical glow appears beside him, catching their attention. Nine Zoho, and before them, a full and gleaming suit of plate armor appears as if by magic. Partak says that armor is every knight's dream, but our hero just thinks it's expensive, explaining that it's an item so costly that even rich knights pass it down through generations. Suddenly, the blonde mercenary comes running and screaming desperately for the captain, and with a panicked expression, he reveals that a horde of monsters has appeared on the outskirts. He continues, saying the monsters are trying to enter the city and the guilds can barely contain them. Partak says it's best for our hero to join the subjugation, but he asks why he should. Then the blonde mercenary runs up and starts explaining the reason with great excitement, shouting that unlike a dungeon with an owner, this one has no fee and Marin is a city of merchants. With his eyes shining, the young man adds that they're going to make a ton of money. Our protagonist agrees and, with a serious look, tells them to go, as there's no reason to hesitate. But suddenly a voice shouts for them to wait, and the group turns around, confused. It was the secretary Grail, out of breath and leaning on a horse, leaving everyone confused, and the man with glasses introduces himself, revealing that the vice manager sent a warhorse as a gift. The animal was magnificent, with black, silky fur, divine muscles, and a certified pedigree. Our hero is suspicious and asks if the vice manager really sent that gift. Grail shrinks under the intimidating gaze and stammers, saying it's for no special reason, but our protagonist continues to stare at the man with a serious and suspicious expression. Terrified, the secretary insists it's just a small gesture of goodwill on her part. With that, Eugene simply gets on the horse and tells the man to send his thanks. The fairy then celebrates and tells them to go rake in some cash in that battle. The blonde mercenary asks what they'll do now, and Partak shouts angrily at the young man. Angrily, the mercenary leader tells everyone to run to catch up with our hero. Grail just watches the group running to the fight with a serious expression. Meanwhile, in the forest, a group of goblins is gathered and alert. Suddenly, the creatures hear a strange noise and get confused in the middle of the woods. The sound was the warhorse galloping at high speed through the dense forest, and our protagonist flashes by like a bolt of lightning, cutting one of the goblins in half without even looking back. The fairy says the horde is huge, and Eugene thinks the guild members must already be done for. With a cold and determined look, our hero just says that's great for his plans, and continues riding, revealing that he doesn't like sharing his loot one bit. The speed is so great that the leaves from the trees fly everywhere. The warhorse runs without stopping, crushing everything in its path, and the sun shines brightly through the leaves of the trees as he advances through the forest. With the reins in his hand, our protagonist focuses on getting to the battle as fast as possible. The scene then shows us an intense fight between several adventurers and a horde of monsters. A blonde knight shouts at the monsters that they will never pass her unless they defeat her. With that, the goblins charge at the girl with their eyes glowing. Her horse gets spooked and ends up throwing the knight to the ground in panic, and then the animal flees in desperation, leaving the young woman behind alone. Fallen on the ground, the woman introduces herself as Madrika and swears in the name of the city of Marin, but suddenly she looks up and is shocked to be surrounded by the monsters. The goblins are also confused and look up, not understanding what's happening. The knight then screams in terror and starts begging for her life, and with a desperate blow, the young woman attacks one of the creatures to try to survive. At that moment, our protagonist arrives on his warhorse, ready for battle, and with a swift move, he starts taking out all the goblins that were surrounding the girl. The force of the attack is so great that the woman is thrown backward by the impact, and our hero creates a circle of destruction around the fallen knight on the ground. Safe, the woman thanks him and asks the name of the mysterious knight who saved her, but our protagonist just stares at her with a serious look and continues his attack. The blonde knight attacks another creature with a powerful blow, showing her skill, and with a smile, the woman asks for her savior's name while fighting. Our protagonist questions if the name matters, saying it won't make a difference if they perish, and the knight laughs, agreeing with his logic as the battle continues. Then the young woman says that if they survive, she'll ask for his name again. In the city, the knight tells the crowd how hundreds of goblins attacked them, bragging and saying she fought bravely alongside the mysterious knight. With a smile, the woman says that in the end, they were victorious and protected the city. A curious man asks which knight she's talking about, and the young woman smiles maliciously. With a serious look, she reveals to everyone that the great hero's name is Yan Eugene. The crowd goes wild and various rumors about our hero's deeds begin to spread, and soon everyone in the city is chanting our protagonist's name in one voice. From a window, a man observes the scene and notes that the entire city is acclaiming the young man, thinking that the more famous our hero becomes, the harder it will be to control him. The mayor asks if they can just leave things as they are, and his granddaughter says everything is under control. The red-haired woman says she expected his name to spread, because the greater the honor, the easier the fall, and then asks her grandfather if he's heard of our hero's attendant, the one who delivers the goods. With a smile, the woman reveals that the young man is actually the illegitimate son of House T1, and the mayor is surprised by the revelation, asking what she means by that. She says that if they can get both, they can form ties with someone who could become the head of the house. The grandfather smiles and understands that her intention is to secure the loyalty of a knight who protects an heir. With that, the man decides that he himself will send a gift to show his gratitude. The woman thanks him, and he informs her that he will list her as the recommender, and that she should use it wisely. Then the scene shows us a large, luxurious building at night in the city of Marin. In a room, the woman drinks tea and thinks that a merchant knows only one path to follow, and with a malicious smile, she concludes her thought by saying the way is to dig a well and just wait. Our protagonist then walks down a corridor without showing any resistance, and with a quick move, he opens the handle of a large wooden door. In the room, the woman waits for him and thinks that they will drink every drop she draws from the well. With a smile on her face, the orange-haired woman welcomes our hero, and in a new and imposing suit of armor, the woman calls him the hero who saved Marin. Our protagonist enters the room, and the woman introduces herself as Priscilla, the vice manager. As she drinks her tea, she analyzes him and wonders if he's really the knight who defeated a troll, thinking that he looks nothing like the knights she used to imagine. With a smile, the woman compliments the armor and says it was made in the best workshop in the city. The armor was a mix of iron and ogre bone, so tough that not even a dragon's fang could pierce it. Our hero then says that with the new armor, the next dungeon raid will be easier, and also thanks her for the food, saying he now expects better results from his mercenaries. The woman smiles maliciously and says that since that's the case, she'd like to make a proposal, but our protagonist stands up and says he's busy. Leaving the woman shocked, he informs her that he will visit her again when the suppression of the House T1 dungeon is complete, and reveals that their contract only applies to the products from the current expedition. With an annoyed look, the woman hears that he will focus on collecting magic stones next time. Priscilla then screams desperately for him to wait a moment as our hero walks away, and our protagonist stops for a moment, but doesn't turn to face the woman. The orange-haired woman says there's still something for them to discuss. Our protagonist asks what that would be, and she says he can't pretend forever. The men explain that the armor and horse he received cost much more than the loot, and with a smile, the woman asks if he never learned that everything in the world has a price. She then threatens him, saying she can spread the word that the hero is a knight without honor. But our protagonist just stares at her with his red eyes glowing in the darkness. The woman challenges him to argue and defend himself from the accusation she just made, but to her surprise, our hero just smiles and says he finds the situation amusing, saying they gave him gifts he didn't ask for and are now demanding payment. With a dark look, he wonders if mere merchants think they can threaten him. The woman and her men are in shock while our hero's mercenaries crack a smile, and Eugene says he already has a contract and doesn't care what they say as long as they keep buying. He agrees that everything has a price, and tells the woman to say whatever she wants about him, warning her that then she will understand the true meaning of the word price, and says it will look look like the company teamed up with Marin to persecute the city's hero. He says that if that happens, no knight will help Marin, and with that, he announces his departure. Partek then turns to the vice manager and says her audacity is regrettable. The orange-haired woman thinks that if the approach had been different, their relationship would be better, and one of the men beside her calls her name in fear, while she remains furious. Then the woman calls our hero by name and asks him to wait a moment. To everyone's surprise, Priscilla bows and humbly offers her deepest apologies, admitting she went too far and, as penance, wishes to start their relationship from scratch. With that, Priscilla says she will uphold the contract and add clauses for his security. The woman thinks she has seen knights stoop for money, but that our hero is different, and concludes that our protagonist is too dangerous to mess with, and that she made a mistake. The woman thinks her merchant instincts won't allow her to ignore him, and with a determined smile, she seems to have made an important decision. Our protagonist then sits down and says he can at least hear her proposal, but with a serious look. He warns that better be a tempting offer to justify the wait. The orange-haired woman thanks him with a relieved smile for his mercy. The fairy says the armor is just for show, and the blonde mercenary comments on the new gear. The little fairy cheers, saying he's the best, while Partek praises the contract he secured. Our protagonist asks if he thinks so, and the man confirms, saying the company is huge, explaining that with Marin as a base, they have hundreds of branches and trade with demonic kingdoms. Partek says the proposal of unlimited access to dungeons is bold and better than being a noble, and the mercenary leader praises the move, but our hero says he only did it because he got annoyed. Suddenly, someone shouts that wearing flashy armor doesn't make him a knight. A bald old man scoffs and wonders if, with that pretty little face, he even knows how to hold a sword. The fairy gets annoyed by the insult, but our protagonist remains calm. Then Kamara appears and greets him, saying he arrived just in time. The noble corrects himself and asks if he should call him Lord Tiwan, but our hero says there's no need. Kamara says his brother hired new mercenaries, but that something seems off, remembering that the previous group, wiped out by wolves, was made up of bad people. The blonde noble adds that the new mercenaries look strangely familiar. With a serious look, our protagonist carefully analyzes the situation, and with that, Kamara reveals that he would like our hero to serve as the commander of the subjugation. But suddenly, the bald mercenary interrupts him and approaches the noble, asking if, should our protagonist fall in the dungeon, he becomes the commander. Our hero's group is furious, and Partek shouts that this is absurd. The mercenary defends himself, saying he doesn't like to say it, but this isn't a picnic, and continues, explaining that in the dungeon, life is cheap, and they need to be prepared. Our protagonist then accepts the plan and says he'll count on him, leaving the man shocked. Eugene agrees that if he falls, the bald guy takes over, and tells everyone to get ready. The little fairy tries to warn him about the man, but our protagonist says he already knows everything. Kamara confirms that Bertel hired the mercenaries to get rid of him, but watching things not go as planned for his enemy could be interesting. With a malicious smile, our hero thinks this whole situation is going to be very amusing. Inside the dungeon, a strange creature with a body of water prepares to attack, and without a second thought, our protagonist charges and cuts the monster with a swift blow. The battle begins, and our hero leads the charge against the creatures in the dungeon, continuing the battle and eliminating several goblins with his sword. With a precise blow, he takes down another creature, showing his strength. The bald mercenary watches the fight and thinks our hero's reputation is no exaggeration, noting that the young man is taking out dozens of enemies alone, without needing help. For the group, it's like being behind a giant shield, with a sense of security. With a malicious look, the man thinks he needs to stay alert to find an opening, and plans to use his poison blade, needing just one chance to strike. Our protagonist warns that from here on, only stronger monsters will appear, and with a serious look, he says only those who are confident should follow him. The bald mercenary smiles and thinks this is the perfect opportunity for his plan. The blonde mercenary and Partek try to go, but the bald man tells them to wait. The two are confused, and Partek says our protagonist must have some other plan. With that, our hero and the other mercenaries advance alone through the dark cave, and he thinks the last time he was here was with Galfredic, and that now it's not as interesting. Our protagonist remembers the smiling face of his old battle rival, thinking that Galfredic was an excellent leader who always took the lead. He concludes that with that kind of leadership, they would have cleared the dungeon without any problems. With that, our hero stops in the middle of the cave and can't help but wonder something, and with a thoughtful look, he asks himself what Galfredic would do in a situation like this. He imagines how the red-haired knight would have dealt with the group of treacherous mercenaries. Suddenly, the bald man and his men surround him, and our hero says they finally dropped the act. A blue energy appears, and he says that if the men are so eager to depart, he will grant their wish. The mercenaries are startled to see a water creature emerging and preparing an attack, and the elemental attacks with a water vortex that extinguishes all the torches, plunging the place into darkness. The men shout that they can't see anything, and the bald man tells them to stay calm and relight the torches. In total darkness, the confusion begins, and glowing eyes appear. Watching the group, one of the men is attacked attacked and lets out a scream of pain, unable to see who hit him. The bald leader realizes they are under attack and tells his men to fight back, but in the midst of the confusion, one of the mercenaries shouts that they are attacking their own allies. With that, chaos fully sets in, and the screams of pain echo through the cave. In the darkness, our protagonist watches the chaos with his eyes glowing red. The bald man despairs and thinks the lack of light has created the perfect situation for our hero, and with trembling hands, the man tries to light a flint but fails. Suddenly, everything falls silent, and the mercenary starts to sweat. Terrified, the man wonders why he can't hear anything anymore. And at that moment, our protagonist appears in front of him without making a sound. With a cold voice, our hero asks if he really needs light, and the man is startled. Eugene then helps him light the flint and comments on how weak human eyes are. The light reveals all the fallen mercenaries, and our hero asks who the hunter is now. The bald man stares at our protagonist, completely shocked by the scene, and terrified. The mercenary calls him a monster, and our hero shows his sharp fangs. Back at the castle, on a rainy night, our hero returns from his mission. Suddenly, Kamara appears in the hallway and desperately shouts our protagonist its name. With that, Eugene appears with a calm expression and slowly descends the stairs. His red eyes glow in the darkness as he faces the commotion before him. Kamara runs towards him alongside Bertel and asks if the news he heard is true. Bertel asks what that noise is, and our hero says they can hear it from the one involved. On the floor, the bald mercenary is all beaten up and seems completely out of his mind. The two brothers are shocked, and Kamara shouts the man's name, not believing the scene. Terrified, the bald man confesses with wide eyes that he tried to eliminate our hero, and reveals he did everything under Bertel's orders, who smiles and says the guy's gone mad. Kamara gets angry and yells at his brother, asking how far he intends to go, and continues questioning if the blonde noble will really believe the words of a madman. With a mocking smile, Bertel grabs the man and asks if that isn't right. Our protagonist then uses his power, and the bald man wonders how he dared to attack his master. The man shouts that a useless person like him deserves this end, and tries to finish himself, and with that, he throws himself out the window to end his own life. Kamara screams the man's name in desperation as he falls to his certain demise, and the mercenary smashes into a statue in the courtyard, startling the servants. Bertel says he went mad in the dungeon and questions how his brother could believe that, but Kamara glares at him and says the strange one is Bertel, who seems relieved by the man's end. With a sweaty face, the blonde noble is speechless at the accusation, and then turns to our hero, accusing him of having no pride and of slandering him with delusions. With a cold look, our protagonist asks if, on his honor as a knight, he is innocent. The blonde noble hesitates for a second, but replies that of course he is innocent. Our hero then raises his gauntleted hand and prepares for a proposal, and with a defiant look, invites him to a trial by combat in the middle of the courtyard. With a smile, our protagonist says they will wager their honor and the truth as knights, and the blonde noble grinds his teeth in anger, not believing the audacity of the challenge. The news spreads, and everyone in the castle comments that he hired an assassin. One of the maids says he always causes trouble, but this time he went too far. One of the servants reveals that the target is Eugene, the knight the Lord hired. Bertel then faces our protagonist with a serious look and prepares for combat. With that, Kamura positions himself as the judge of that duel between the two knights, and announces that the truth will be decided in combat, and the winner will be right. The truth, according to divine will be granted only to the great victor. With that, Bertel charges at our hero with a cry of fury, attempting a powerful blow to end the fight at once, but our protagonist just watches him with a calm expression. Unfazed, the blonde noble misses the blow, and his sword strikes the ground, creating sparks. He attacks again, but our hero defends with ease, and the swords clash, and the force of the impact between the two blades creates an explosion of sparks. Our protagonist notices that Bertel's fighting style is very familiar, and then remembers seeing Bertel in the past, shouting that he found the vampire. Back then, our hero had to flee from that creature for over a decade. Back in the present, Bertel is shocked to realize his opponent's true identity. The swords clash forcefully, and the sound of steel echoes throughout the courtyard. With that, Bertel grinds his teeth and feels the overwhelming strength of his opponent, and in a swift move, our protagonist disarms the noble, who is in shock. The noble's sword flies away, and he falls to the ground, completely disarmed. With a cold look, our hero tells him to pick up his sword to continue, and the blonde noble stares at him, terrified and with a smile of pure desperation. Kamara thinks that his brother's swordsmanship was not weak at all, but this time, even a layman could see the vast difference between the two, and it was obvious to everyone that our protagonist was overwhelmingly stronger. He had a power far superior to the noble's younger brother who was watching. Then our hero attacks with a swift and precise blow to end the combat, but Kamura shouts to stop and steps in front to protect his brother. Our protagonist asks if that's enough for him with a serious look. The noble says the duel isn't over yet, but he can't watch his brother be finished off, and then announces that Bertel can no longer fight, declaring our hero the winner. But Bertel shouts that he can still fight and that he will finish off that scumbag. Kimura then tells him to stop and says the fight has already been decided and tells his brother to act like a knight, admit his crime, and reflect in prison. The blonde noble shouts for his brother to shut up and asks what he did that was so wrong. With his sword in hand, he shouts our protagonist's name in a fit of pure rage and charges, shouting that if our hero weren't here, none of this would have happened. With his eyes glowing, he says he wouldn't have suffered this humiliation. Our protagonist then readies his sword and a blue light reflects on its blade, but for an instant, he seems confused by what is happening and wonders why his body isn't obeying his commands all of a sudden. Just then, Bertel's armor changes color, and he wonders what is happening. Kimura laments that his brother didn't take the last chance he gave him to surrender, and with a swift move, our hero attacks Bertel with a final blow in the courtyard. The crowd and the mercenaries watch the scene in silence, shocked by the outcome. Our protagonist then stands over the noble's fallen body, ending the duel. Kimura just watches his foolish brother lying on the ground as our hero walks away. With that, the scene shifts to a sunny and lively port city. In a hallway, our protagonist walks and thinks that all of this was a waste. The fairy appears and says he used his first servant just to get a confession, but he explains that the man was weak and would have been found out, so he was just a disposable tool. Our hero asks if he looks like someone who forgives betrayal, and the fairy calls him cold. The little fairy says a vampire needs slaves, but our boy says he doesn't need that, thinking that turning weaklings into servants is just trouble and more work for him. As he opens the door, he thinks of someone, but overhears a conversation about Lord Galfredic. The woman and the man in the room are startled and say it's already been 2 weeks. With a smile, the man and the orange-haired woman greet our hero, and the man runs to him, saying he heard the last subjugation was a success. Our protagonist then grabs him and asks what happened to Lord Galfredic. The orange-haired woman just stares at him with a serious expression, saying nothing, and then reveals that 2 weeks ago, the red-haired knight participated in a subjugation. The woman reveals that they say he vanished in the labyrinth, and that the searches found nothing. With a serious look, our protagonist understands that he didn't return from the monster zone, and with that, our hero rides at high speed to the territory of Count Evergrow. He arrives at a luxurious mansion and prepares to enter and find out what happened. At the top of the stairs, a man greets him and compliments his appearance, saying he's heard a lot about him. Our protagonist thanks him for the compliment, but seems in a hurry, and the man understands. The young man introduces himself as Jabin, the eldest son of the family, and invites him inside. In the room, he says that Galfredic's greed got the better of him, and that he entered the upper levels alone. Our hero repeats the young man's words with a very suspicious look, and Jabin confirms, revealing that his family hasn't been able to enter that place for over 100 years. The place is where the master of the labyrinth lives, a dangerous place full of mysteries. Our protagonist asks what that is, and another man explains that it's a being that rules the place. The black-haired man says the red-haired knight was blinded by desire and caused trouble. Jebin then introduces him as Sir Lugitz, the knight who led the group with Galfredic, and the knight greets him, saying he heard about the duel and that they have something in common. With a smile, the man reveals that he won the family tournament and that he defeated Galfredic. Jebin apologizes for the situation and says this shows how valuable the knight was, and the young man asks if our protagonist and the red-haired knight had a friendship. Our hero remembers his rival's way, and the fairy gets annoyed at the memory. Jebin promises full support for him coming for a friend, and asks him to listen, revealing that if someone disappears for more than a month in the labyrinth, they are declared deceased. With that, the young man warns that 3 weeks have already passed, and there's only one left for the search, and concludes, saying that if they don't find him in the next week, there will be no more hope. Our protagonist then stands up and says he will leave for the labyrinth immediately, but Jebin stops him, saying the place is not a stroll, and that he needs to prepare. The young man then proposes that in 3 days a subjugation team will be ready, and asks our hero to rest and recover from his journey until the day of departure. Jebin reveals they've hired a mage to help, and that he will be very useful, and the fairy wonders about this mage they're taking with them. In the city, the little fairy complains about the night and suggests setting fire to the guy's nose. With a serious look, our protagonist thinks there's more than one strange thing about this story, and remembers that the red-haired knight said he would receive a title from Count Evergrow. The man even invited him to come along and make a good impression on the noble. Our hero finds it strange that he's being tested again, with the title already secured, and wonders why, because he knows the knight wouldn't act out of greed and would have assembled a group with caution. Suddenly, a man shouts in the street that the Messiah is coming, and our hero watches the scene. The preacher talks about a prophecy where the goddess of victory will descend to destroy the earth, and adds that the disaster has already begun with the trimmers and the dying animals. With that, the man mentions that a knight has disappeared, and the fairy wonders if it's their leader. An old man then shouts for the people to throw calf's blood on their doors and offer the meat, and the preacher finishes, saying that with this the Messiah will come to save the red, stained land. The fairy thinks this is nonsense, and our hero notices that the city's mood is not normal. One of the followers then approaches and hands a pamphlet to our protagonist, and he takes the paper with a strange symbol. Thinking about the animals dying near the labyrinth, our hero wonders if part of the place collapsed and why Gafretic would have entered there, and then tells Marianne that they are going to the labyrinth right now. The pink-haired mage says 3 days is too long, and that they will go ahead alone. Suddenly, the mage reveals that she never thought she would see a vampire right in front of her. And with that, our hero is completely shocked by the revelation, and his eyes widen. The pink-haired young person scoffs, saying that vampires were hunted to extinction, and continues the taunt, wondering how our hero walks around in broad daylight. Angrily, our protagonist grabs the mage forcefully, without any hesitation. Meanwhile, a preacher continues to shout that the Messiah is coming, and our hero tightens his grip on the young person's neck, showing all his anger. With a cold voice, he orders the mage to reveal her identity, and how she recognized him, and threatens to break the young person's neck, who asks him to let go so she can speak. The pink-haired mage tries to explain, but the force of the grip prevents her, and with difficulty, manages to say the words, "Blue Shadow," leaving our hero confused. The fairy Marianne finds the name familiar, but can't remember where she's heard it. Suddenly, the little fairy remembers something, and is completely shocked, shouting for her master to stop, and saying he can't get rid of her now. Our protagonist turns in surprise, and the fairy reveals that the person he's holding is a mage, explaining that she is from the Blood Shadow School, a group of mages who serve vampires. With the revelation, our hero releases the mage, who collapses to the ground, and the fairy confirms. Suddenly, the mage wakes up annoyed and complains that there was no way to answer with her neck being squeezed. Our protagonist apologizes awkwardly, and the fairy accuses him of starting it all. The mage then composes herself and, with a fake cough, prepares to introduce herself, introducing herself as Sereno Romari, and explaining that her school can sense the presence of vampires. Sereno reveals she was looking for him at Jebin's request, and our hero understands everything. The mage asks about his friendship with the red-haired, and our hero thinks about shutting his rival's mouth. She then reveals she was also part of the subjugation group when Gafretic disappeared. Surprised by the information, our protagonist asks her to tell him the details, and the mage agrees, starting to tell that she needed monster items and joined the mission. She says the labyrinth is dangerous, but since it was mostly cleared, they advanced with confidence. But when they went deeper, an earthquake started, and the whole labyrinth shook with a roar. She continues her account and says the labyrinth floor suddenly collapsed, and when she was about to fall into the abyss, a mysterious hand held her firmly. It was the red-haired knight who saved her, but he ended up falling into the abyss in her place. Thanks to him, the mage was saved, but the other knights started yelling at her because they all believed the earthquake was Gafretic's fault for opening the gate. Since he saved her life, she felt obligated to tell our hero everything. Our protagonist thinks her story is very different from what Jibin said, and wonders if the noble lied, or if someone deliberately passed on the wrong information. But the mage reveals that at that moment, she managed to see something very strange in the depths. At the bottom of the hole where the red-haired knight fell, she saw a giant eye drawn on the rock. Our protagonist is shocked and asks if it was really an eye, and the mage confirms, and then remembers the cultist pamphlets, showing it was the same image. The scene shows us a cult worshipping the eye symbol, and shouting that the Messiah will descend, welcoming him with sacrifices and calling him salvation for the land. With a malicious smile, a hooded man reveals that he will awaken soon. A soldier reports that the supplies are ready, and everyone has already gathered. Lujits asks how our hero feels, and if he's excited to reunite with his friend. Our protagonist just replies that he hopes he doesn't have to carry a body back, and the black-haired knight says the red-haired man is not the type to go down easily. He starts to laugh and says that Gafretic certainly has our protagonist's trust. Our hero thinks he wanted to go in earlier, but he needed to keep an eye on that scumbag because he understood that his rival's disappearance was not a mere accident. He thinks that if the man survived for 3 weeks, he can hold on for 3 more days. Suddenly, a group of Templars appears and greets our hero, who is surprised. Their leader introduces himself and says it's an honor to serve alongside such a pious knight. The little fairy laughs at them calling a vampire pious, and our hero just tells them to do their best. Lujits comments that it's rare for Templars to be interested in a knight, as they only follow divine orders, and the knight even suggests that our protagonist change his class to a paladin. With a mocking smile, the man seems to enjoy the idea. The group then advances to the entrance, and our hero calls Partak to give instructions. Inside the labyrinth, the group sets up camp and Lujit's orders no one to lower their guard. The fairy Miriam is impressed with the place and the overflowing water energy. Our protagonist notices the place is different from a dungeon and seems artificial. And with that, he thinks that if the worst happens, he could survive by hiding there. Suddenly, Lujits appears with a smile and says it's the perfect place for scoundrels to hide. The knight praises our hero and he asks how far they are from the disappearance site. The black-haired man tells him not to be impatient and reminds him that he trusts his friend, but says the person our hero most needs to trust is him, as they have already mapped everything. Our protagonist then questions that for a mapped place, there always seem to be many casualties, and the knight laughs, saying with a malicious look that those are just sacrifices. With the revelation, our protagonist is completely shocked and furious. Suddenly, everything starts to shake and several pieces of debris fall from the ceiling. The man shouts that it's an earthquake and tells everyone to hold on. As the structure is changing, and amidst the chaos, the knight informs our protagonist that they have arrived at the location. The scene shows us several giant gears moving and changing the structure, and the knight reveals that this moving zone is a shortcut to the upper levels. Sereno is startled by the tremor, and our protagonist continues with a serious look and asks where the heck this shortcut is in the middle of all the chaos. With a malicious smile, the black-haired knight reveals the secret, saying the shortcut is right under our protagonist's feet, who becomes alert. Just then, the floor opens up, revealing giant moving gears, and with that, our protagonist and the mage fall into a new, unknown floor. He understands it wasn't an earthquake, and that his rival fell into a trap. Sereno wonders why and suddenly points to something in the darkness. Our hero then looks in the direction she pointed, and is shocked by the scene, because his friend Gafretic is tied to a structure, all beaten up and unconscious. Without a second thought, our protagonist charges forward to rescue his rival, and lands with agility in front of the red-haired knight, who seems badly injured. Carefully, he touches the man's neck to see if he's still alive, and realizes he's still breathing, and that he can save him if he acts fast. But suddenly, the fairy Miriam warns her master that something seems very wrong, explaining that she felt a different presence coming from the depths of the labyrinth. With that, a strong and mysterious gust of wind starts to blow through the area, and Sereno wonders where the heck all that wind is coming from. Just then, a red light starts to glow in the darkness, drawing their attention, and from the darkness, a pair of giant red eyes appears, staring at our protagonist. Suddenly, a monstrous arm covered in pink energy appears in the hall, and a giant demon-like creature emerges, preparing for combat. The mage is frightened, and our hero tells her to protect the red-haired knight at all costs. With a roar, the creature charges with a powerful blow to finish them all, but our protagonist doesn't back down and defends the attack with his sword, without fear. With a determined look, our hero faces the giant creature, unfazed, and a red energy surrounds him as he prepares to counter-attack. The force of the impact is so great that the mage is thrown far and lets out a scream. The monster then stares at our protagonist, with its eyes glowing with pure fury, and the giant creature prepares to attack with its weapon that glows pink. Sereno is frightened, but our hero leaps to attack without a second thought. Suddenly, an intense red light glows in the monster's chest, and the creature attacks with a blow that explodes the labyrinth floor with force. Meanwhile, the red-haired knight remains tied up and defenseless, and our protagonist is furious with what is happening in front of him. With a swift move, he launches a quick attack to stop the creature, but the monster attacks again and throws our hero and his friend far away. In the air, our protagonist reaches out his hand to try to save his companion, and suddenly, a magical barrier appears and protects our hero and the mage. Furious, our protagonist shows his fangs and wonders what kind of joke this is. Sereno warns that it's a minotaur, a high-ranked beast, and very dangerous. And terrified, she shouts that even a vampire would be defeated by that monster. But our hero is not shaken and faces the minotaur with a look full of fury, and the mage prepares for battle alongside our hero with her staff. Our protagonist then says the mage crossed a line with that barrier. Sereno apologizes but says she couldn't just watch a vampire throw himself to his end, and he replies that if she wants to save the red-haired knight, she needs to keep a cool head. The mage is shocked and says the labyrinth wasn't big enough to house a minotaur. Suddenly, Lujits and his group of Templars appear in the area in a suspicious way, and the black-haired knight questions the mage for not using her earth magic. He scoffs, saying the mage only knows how to make chimeras and survived by luck. With a malicious smile, the black-haired knight faces them all with his yellow eyes, and questions if she didn't really want to save the red-haired knight. With that, our protagonist understands that was Lujits who set up the whole situation, and furious, our hero realizes it was he who left his friend in that state. The knight scoffs and says he just brought not the Lord's friend for him to find. And then our protagonist grabs him by the neck, saying he's rude for a knight. With his eyes glowing, a dark energy appears in his hand as he squeezes. Our protagonist stares at him with pure fury and prepares to finish off the traitor, but the black-haired knight defends himself with one hand, and a pink energy appears. Sereno is shocked, and our protagonist says that monstrous strength is not his. A purple energy envelopes the knight, and a magical symbol glows on his hand. The mage warns that it's a magic that grants power inherited from someone else, explaining that it was once used to inherit power, but is now forbidden. The knight scoffs and says it's just an excuse for cowards to monopolize power, revealing that they are the chosen ones to survive. When despair comes, our protagonist understands that he used someone else's power to defeat the red-haired knight, and furious with the revelation, a dark red energy surrounds him with a look full of anger. He says he will first make him realize his place. The two then charge into combat, and the battle begins with a clash of energies. The red and purple energies clash in an explosion of power, and the mage is impressed, wondering if a normal vampire would emit that energy. With a malicious smile, the black-haired knight realizes he's not the only one with hidden power, and the two exchange blows at an incredible speed, and the fight intensifies, trading powerful punches, and the battle's energy spreads through the hall. The knight warns that he has no intention of holding back and releases more of his power. Suddenly, the floor breaks, and the mage is caught off guard, falling into a trap. The black-haired man reveals that all the traps in the labyrinth have already been exposed, and with a malicious smile, he tells our protagonist to fall silently at once. Our hero desperately shouts the mage's name, who was caught in the trap. Sereno then creates a magical barrier to protect herself, and our hero charges and rushes the black-haired knight with his eyes glowing with fury. With a determined look, our protagonist prepares to finish off the traitor. The knight then hides behind a stone wall that rises from the ground, and our hero cuts through the wall with his sword, landing a precise blow on the knight. The black-haired man gets a cut on his face and stares at our protagonist, holding his weapon firmly and preparing for the next round. The knight thinks he heard rumors of our hero's strength, but what he saw was beyond that, and with a malicious smile, he concludes that using the red-haired knight as bait was the right choice. With an insane smile, he reveals that finally the last sacrifice will be offered. Suddenly, several magic circles appear, and the mage wonders what is happening. Sereno apologizes and warns that the magic circle will no longer form. Our protagonist then goes to the red-haired knight, and the mage asks where he's going. Sereno is terrified by the situation and can't believe what is happening, and wonders what kind of inferno this is. Starting to have regrets, the mage laments getting involved and runs desperately through the hall, but suddenly stops and is shocked by the scene she sees in front of her. Because our protagonist is holding the unconscious red-haired knight in his arms, he then turns to the mage and asks if she can save this man's life. With a serious look, our hero says that was not the answer to his question, and the mage is embarrassed and afraid of our protagonist's reaction. With a sigh, she agrees and says she will do her best to save the knight. The fairy then appears and warns that she has checked everything, and there is no way out. Our hero agrees and says the place looks like the end of the labyrinth. A boss room. The fairy reveals she can't control anything there, and that the puddle has a different consistency. Our hero then steps into the red puddle, and the fairy realizes she can't control the liquid, explaining that the blood puddle has a very different consistency than normal. With a serious look, our protagonist analyzes the situation and the red puddle, and notices several eyes drawn on the floor. Wondering if this is what the mage saw, the fairy explains she only controls the blood of the dead, and that this one's owner is still alive. And with the revelation, a red energy rises from the puddle and begins to move. A giant arm made of blood emerges and prepares to attack, and the red energy transforms into the Minotaur, which faces our hero with fury. With his sword in hand, he tells the fairy to find an exit at all costs. The Minotaur then stands up, revealing its size and power. Our hero notices the red-haired knight still can't move and needs to act fast, and with a determined look, he concludes that he first needs to immobilize the monster. With that, our protagonist charges and attacks the Minotaur with his sword, using his dark ability to trap the monster and end the battle. With his ability, he manages to trap the Minotaur in shadow claws, and our protagonist seizes the chance, advancing to attack the monster. The battle continues intensely, and our hero prepares for a final blow. With a powerful attack, he tries to pierce the creature's chest, but the sword doesn't go in, and the Minotaur opens its mouth, launching a blast of energy at our protagonist. The creature prepares to attack with its mouth full of yellow energy, but our protagonist dodges the attack, and the red energy spreads through the hall. The battle continues continues, and our hero dodges the Minotaur's attacks with agility, and dodges another blow, and the monster's energy throws him into the air. The Minotaur attacks with its horn, but our hero defends with his sword, and then realizes that a normal sword can't even scratch the monster's skin. With that, our protagonist decides that for now, he'll have to make do with what he has, and a red energy appears in his hand, creating a new weapon for the battle. With a determined look, our hero prepares to use his new weapon, and charges, attacking the Minotaur with his new weapon in a swift blow. The battle continues, and our hero dodges the creature's attacks with agility, and in the air, he prepares for a quick counter attack against the monster. With a cry of rage, our protagonist shows his fangs and charges with all his might, but the Minotaur hits him squarely and throws him far with the force of the impact. The creature's attack hits the ground and creates an explosion of pink energy, and with the force of the blow, our hero is thrown against a wall. Suddenly, a beam of light passes through the Minotaur's chest without causing damage. Meanwhile, Sereno tries to heal the red-haired knight with her light magic and asks him to wake up, as his friend is in danger. Our protagonist realizes the mage's words about the monster were true and understands that this high-ranked creature is on a different level of power. The Minotaur seems not to have felt the attack and stares at our hero with fury, and annoyed, our protagonist wonders how he's going to defeat this monster. Then he decides to use all his power at once to win the fight, and with that, a dark energy envelops him, and he transforms into a beast. Sereno desperately shouts our protagonist's name, who is on the ground. With his face covered in blood, our hero shows his fangs in a last effort, and faces the Minotaur, feeling helpless, a feeling he hadn't had in a decade. The creature attacks with its claws, and our hero tries to defend himself, but wonders why this time the pain of defeat feels so much stronger. With that, the monster's blow hits him squarely and throws him violently. Our protagonist feels his whole body ache and darkness begins to take over his vision, and lying on the ground, he stares at the labor and ceiling, completely defeated. He wonders why, as the mage continues to care for the red-haired knight, who remains injured and unconscious in the middle of the battle. But suddenly, his friend's eye opens and begins to glow with a blue light, and with a determined look, the red-haired knight seems to have finally awakened. The mage Sereno stares on, her eyes wide in disbelief. She thinks about how she warned our hero so many times, but even for a vampire, there was no way he could take down that horrifying monster. With an injured Gafretic by her side, the mage realizes they're completely trapped. The Minotaur gears up for a final attack, and she wonders if this is the end, and with a sad smile she apologizes to her master, thinking her journey ends right here. But suddenly Gafretic wakes up and grabs the mage's staff that was healing him. He apologizes, realizing she got dragged into this mess because of him. Sereno yells that they need to get out of there, but the knight says he can't. He reveals that Lujits used him as bait to lure in our hero, because the black-haired knight had been targeting the hero since the very start of the mission. By pretending to be a friend, he only ended up holding the kid back and getting in his way. With a sorrowful look, he concludes that all of this happened just because he was too weak. The red-haired knight thinks their relationship could have just been a casual encounter, but he was drawn to our hero's strength and unshakable determination. He didn't want that connection to fade and wished to become strong enough to stand by his side. Seeing what he's about to do, the mage Sereno desperately screams for the knight to wait. With a sad smile on his face, Gafretic asks our hero for forgiveness for everything, all while our hero was sinking into the pool of red. The red-haired knight then promises that in the next life, he will become his knight. Suddenly, our hero's eye snaps open with an intense red light at the bottom of the pool. Lying in the red liquid, he seems to have been awakened by his friend's words. Rage consumes him, and he grinds his teeth with uncontrollable fury. A massive explosion of red energy erupts from the pool, shocking Sereno. From the depths of the red liquid, our hero's hand emerges with immense power, and his fist clenches with insane power, covered in black scales and raw energy. With that, our hero rises again, completely transformed and wrapped in an aura of pure destruction, and his eyes change colors, signaling a newly awakened power. In one swift motion, he lunges at the Minotaur and rips the monster's arm cleat off. Far away, the traitor Lujits watches the whole battle, completely stunned. Meanwhile, our hero is dominating the fight against the giant Minotaur. With his new power, he begins to control the entire pool of red around him, and his transformation gives him a demonic appearance with sharp fangs. Sereno is terrified, noticing the change in his body and wondering what in the world that is. The Minotaur then prepares to counterattack, but Eugene doesn't give him a chance to recover and rushes him. The mage notices the pool of red moves with him, realizing he's on a whole other level now. She then realizes she might be witnessing a historic moment in the making. Our hero raises his hand and prepares an attack with all his might, and he lands a direct hit on the monster, stopping it in its tracks. Suddenly, the eye drawn on the wall begins begins to glow with a red light, and the glow intensifies as if reacting to all that power. Sereno then notices that the level of the red pool has suddenly dropped. Apparently, the monster was using the substance to heal itself. The mage realizes the monster's healing is way too fast, almost like it's cheating with magic, and she notes that right after the eye opened, the fatal wound healed instantly. She then wonders if the labyrinth is using its own lifeblood to heal the monster, and our hero seems to have gotten the same idea. With that, he charges forward and lands a powerful blow right on the giant eye on the wall. The mage Sereno is in shock to see red liquid pouring from the eye. Our hero then continues to hammer the eye without a second's rest. He strikes again with all his strength and dark power, and the Minotaur screams in agony with every hit the hero lands on the eye. Our hero understands that the true master of the labyrinth wasn't the Minotaur, but the labyrinth itself, which kept humans alive and consumed those who disappeared, and he wonders if the labyrinth is the god to whom the cultists offered sacrifices, because the prophecy said that if an angry god wanted to destroy the earth, the only one who could stop it would be none other than the Messiah, and our hero looks ready to take on that role with his new power. Meanwhile, the cultists are praying for their Messiah to hurry up and bring salvation, but Lujits, with a wicked grin, basically tells the god to get even angrier. Sereno then panics when she sees that the entire pool of red has been absorbed. With that, the large golden sphere begins to glow with an intense purple energy. The energy pulses stronger and stronger, and an eye begins to appear at its center. Suddenly, the Minotaur begins to transform, shrouded in a dark and sinister aura. Its body contorts, and the eye on its chest seems to be controlled by a greater force. The creature screams in pain as its body changes, covered in purple energy. Sereno despairs as she sees the monster flying upward, asking where it's going. With a new skeletal appearance, the creature seems to be escaping the labyrinth. At that moment, the golden sphere shatters and the ceiling begins to collapse. The mage starts to panic. She's never even heard of a monster bailing on its own dungeon before. And then she remembers there's a village full of civilians right outside. Suddenly, the fairy Miriam appears, shouting that she finally found the exit. But to her shock, the exit was a giant hole blown through the labyrinth's ceiling. The fairy screams in despair as the whole place comes crashing down on them, and she tries to hurry our hero along, but he doesn't seem to hear her. He just stares at the body of his friend, Galfredic, and he's completely heartbroken to see him in that state. Sereno can't believe her eyes, wondering if a vampire is actually mourning a human. Our hero then approaches his friend's face with a serious expression. The mage thinks about how he hid his identity and passed himself off as a knight, but she's never seen a vampire form bonds with humans, let alone one of noble blood. Eugene then bites into Galfredic's neck, hoping this will be enough to save him. Meanwhile, the transformed Minotaur flies toward the village. It lands with a violent impact, ready to cause massive destruction. The monster then glares at the village, its eyes filled with malice, and it lets out a terrifying roar, preparing to attack. Immediately a blood moon appears in the sky. The mage Sereno approaches and says that our hero carries the blood of a progenitor vampire. She then says there's one more thing she needs to tell him, explaining that a progenitor vampire can revive someone who hasn't been gone for long. She then asks if he knows how kinsmen are created, glancing at Galfredic. In his thoughts, our hero confirms that you have to bite the nape of the neck and inject your blood. But he remembers that if he does this, the person might not be able to handle the transformation. He reveals he's only done it once before, but the target's mind couldn't take it. Sereno, however, thinks it might be different with Galfredic since he's a knight, because someone with exceptional mental fortitude won't lose their identity and will keep their skills. The problem is being a proud knight. He might see this as an insult. With that, the mage asks our hero what he thinks about the situation. Our hero thinks about how he never told his friend his true identity, and he remembers all the moments they spent together. With a sad look, he wonders if there's any other way to save him. Our hero then understands the only way is to ask him directly, and with that, he moves closer to the red-haired knight to begin the transformation. But suddenly, our hero clicks his tongue in frustration at what's happening. He realizes the blood injection is happening way too fast, and his fangs won't retract. At that moment, the rite of succession begins. It's explained that a kinsman is the property of their sovereign, and their soul and power return to them. Suddenly, an aura of blood begins to emanate from Galfredic, and his body starts to unleash an insane amount of energy. The power is so immense that it breaks through the labyrinth's boundaries. It was an aura so overwhelming it could be seen from far away. Meanwhile, in the village, the residents scream in terror, trying to flee. They realize in horror that the labyrinth has collapsed and a giant monster has appeared. With chaos breaking out, creatures begin to attack the townspeople without mercy, and a mother and her child scream in fear as they watch a man get taken down by a monster. The transformed Minotaur also joins the fray, terrorizing the townspeople. From a rooftop, the traitor Lujits watches the whole scene with a wicked smile. He celebrates that the time has finally come to reap the rewards of the sacrifice. He reveals that the humans will never know it's all a game between him and the labyrinth, and when their desperation hits its peak, he'll show up and defeat the Minotaur. With that, he'll become the Messiah who saved everyone by using their own despair. And with a wicked smile, he says that the more people who fall, the more he'll be worshipped. Meanwhile, the village is being attacked by various monsters like giant wolves wolves and drakes. A woman screams the name of her son, who has fallen to the ground, and a giant wolf lunges forward to attack them both. The creature prepares for the final strike as the mother fearfully hugs her child. But suddenly, someone appears to save them in the nick of time. It was none other than our hero, showing up to protect everyone. He grabs the monster's jaw with incredible strength, and finishes it off without a hint of mercy. The mother and her son look up at our hero with a smile of hope, and our hero stands there like a true champion after defeating the wolf. Seeing this, the traitor Lujits furiously wonders why on earth our hero is even there. He questions if the Minotaur didn't awaken by absorbing the blood from his sacrifice, because he offered him up himself and his end was certain, so how did the kid return unharmed? If that's true, he has no clue what in the world the protagonist is. Eugene then turns to Lujits and remarks that he looks pretty happy, asking if Lord Jebin knows about the chaos, but then he says that it doesn't matter anymore, because he's gonna pay for his sins right here and now, and suddenly someone lunges to attack the traitor, but Lujits narrowly dodges, and the attack ends up destroying the tower instead. The traitor then starts laughing like a complete maniac, and to his surprise, his attacker was Gafretic, who asks with a smirk if he missed him. He says he's here to return the favor for the tournament humiliation, and that now the traitor will pay. Calling him out as the cult leader, Lujits